The last signal from 3I Atlas came like a whisper from the edge of existence, a thread of data trembling across the cold emptiness between stars. Astronomers had tracked the interstellar object for years, a visitor from beyond the sun's dominion, carrying the secrets of another system in its strange reflective shell. When the transmissions began, the world listened with cautious wonder. But when 3I, Atlas's final broadcast, reached Earth, it was not wonder that filled the airwaves. It was warning. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. The object had been mysterious from the moment it entered the solar system. Unlike any asteroid or comet cataloged before, it followed a trajectory that defied expectations. It rotated irregularly, glimmered with a metallic luster, and emitted bursts of electromagnetic energy that could not be explained by natural processes. Observatories from Chile to Hawaii to the dark plains of Australia captured its light, and radio telescopes strained to decode the fragments of structured noise that seemed to accompany it. Scientists were divided. Some argued it was a remnant of a destroyed planet, others whispered of technology not born of Earth. As the months passed, 3I Atlas began to transmit with increasing precision. The signal was rhythmic, structured, pulsing through narrow frequency bands as if carrying encoded meaning. At first, the transmissions seemed random, bursts of static and repetition, but then patterns emerged, mathematical sequences, repeating intervals of prime numbers, and harmonic modulations that suggested deliberate construction. The world's great minds gathered around the data, feeding it through supercomputers and algorithms trained to recognize language, encryption, and information density. What they found shook them. Embedded within the signal were universal constants, values that describe the architecture of reality itself, the speed of light, Planck's constant, the ratio of hydrogen to helium in the universe. These constants served as a foundation, a kind of interstellar Rosetta Stone, allowing humanity to begin interpreting what followed. As understanding deepened, a picture emerged, not of communication in words, but in warnings. 3I Atlas was mapping regions of space, charting radiation fields, gravitational distortions, and unseen anomalies that stretched across the void. At the heart of these warnings lay a convergence point, a region of immense gravitational pressure located thousands of light years away and expanding. The term Event Horizon Wavefront began to circulate among astrophysicists. 3I Atlas seemed to be describing a phenomenon no human had ever recorded, a cascading distortion in the fabric of space-time, moving outward like ripples from an invisible explosion. The transmission detailed this expansion in haunting regularity, its intervals synchronized with what researchers came to call the collapse pulse. It wasn't clear what the pulse represented, only that its rate was increasing. Governments took notice when the signals began to shift frequencies toward the microwave spectrum used by satellites. The broadcasts interfered briefly with global communications networks, producing flickers in data streams, moments of digital ghosting where the signal seemed to hijack existing infrastructure. News agencies reported it as atmospheric interference, but those watching closely, the scientists, the engineers, the cryptographers, knew that 3I Atlas was not merely broadcasting, it was targeting, it was selecting frequencies that Earth could not ignore. Then came the message, the final transmission. It arrived abruptly, a single concentrated burst of energy lasting less than 2 minutes. Every telescope listening across the world captured it simultaneously. The data compressed within that 2-minute window would take days to decode. It was structured with surgical precision, as if every photon carried intent. When the translation models converged, they revealed a pattern unlike anything humanity had seen before. The message began with a replication of the hydrogen line, the universal greeting of intelligent life. Then it cascaded through an array of symbols representing decay, collapse, and transformation. The heart of the message was a projection, a simulation encoded within frequencies, depicting a star system destabilizing as its sun fractured under gravitational stress. The system's planets, drawn as luminous spheres of energy, dissolved into streams of plasma, falling inward toward a singularity that grew with each frame. What horrified the interpreters was not the depiction of destruction, it was the scale. The model's constants matched those of the Milky Way. The pattern of stars aligned with Earth's galactic neighborhood. And in the final moments of the transmission, a single luminous point flashed within the diagram. Earth's coordinates, pulsing once, twice, then vanishing into darkness. The reaction was instant. Research agencies around the world compared notes and confirmed the impossible. 3I Atlas had transmitted a cosmological map centered on the Milky Way, showing a wave of spatial compression that appeared to be moving toward it. The object's trajectory, when backtraced, aligned with the direction from which that cosmic disturbance seemed to emanate. It had not been wandering, it was fleeing. The implications shattered centuries of human certainty. The idea that 3I Atlas might be an automated probe, a warning beacon launched from a civilization already consumed by whatever catastrophe it described, became the prevailing theory. Its purpose, encoded in every detail of its message, was not to communicate curiosity, but survival. It was a messenger escaping annihilation, hoping that someone, somewhere would understand in time. Within scientific circles, debates erupted over the physical nature of the danger. Some believed the signal referred to a literal collapse, the birth of a new black hole, or a runaway gravitational anomaly expanding through the galaxy. Others interpreted it as something more abstract, an entropy front, a destabilization of dark matter fields, or even a quantum decay of space-time itself. What made the warning terrifying was its precision. The model's timeline, when translated into human measurements, pointed to an intersection point within the next few centuries, an astronomical blink. Observatories scrambled to verify the data. Deep field surveys focused on the direction indicated in the transmission, revealing subtle distortions in the background radiation of space, ripples where light bent unnaturally, suggesting the presence of enormous gravitational fluctuations. Satellites detected minute but measurable variations in the fine structure constant, a shift so small it could only be explained by fundamental changes in the underlying physics of the universe. If 3I Atlas was correct, reality itself was beginning to strain. What made the final transmission even more chilling was what came after the projection. The signal's last fragment was not mathematical but tonal, a low, resonant vibration modulated at exact intervals as though designed to imprint itself upon any receiver. When analyzed, that tone matched a frequency observed in high-energy gamma bursts, the death throes of collapsing stars. The probe had ended its communication by mirroring the sound of cosmic extinction. No one could agree on what this meant. Some theorists suggested the tone was a distress signal, the equivalent of a cosmic SOS. Others argued it was a key, a frequency designed to resonate with systems like Earth's, triggering recognition or awakening dormant technology. More speculative minds whispered that it was not a message at all, but a form of transmission beyond comprehension, something that could only be experienced, not decoded. The discovery that 3I Atlas's outer surface was composed of non-terrestrial alloys added to the unease. Spectrographic analysis revealed patterns resembling self-assembling nanostructures, material that could reconfigure itself under electromagnetic stimulation. The surface geometry changed subtly as it approached the sun, shifting in ways that suggested intentional adaptation. Some researchers believed the probe had been powered by photonic absorption, literally feeding on starlight to fuel its long journey. As it neared the end of its solar passage, telescopes observed a sudden surge in activity. The object emitted a burst of energy equivalent to a small thermonuclear event, ejecting fragments that vaporized almost instantly. It was as if the probe were burning itself out, expending its remaining power to ensure the transmission reached its destination. Then, silence. 3I Atlas drifted past Mars's orbit, dark and inert, fading into the cold. Its mission complete, humanity was left staring into the abyss of interpretation. The world's governments convened under the pretense of astronomical coordination, but their motives were clear. If 3I Atlas had carried a warning, could it also have carried knowledge? Technologies embedded within its signal that could be harnessed? Laboratories under military oversight began experimenting with recreating the waveform patterns of its final tone. They discovered that certain frequencies, when emitted in high-density plasma fields, produced gravitational anomalies measurable at microscopic scales. It was the first tangible evidence that the transmission was more than symbolic. It was functional. Whispers spread through scientific circles about the key equation, a sequence hidden in the probe's data that appeared to describe a method of manipulating space-time curvature. The equation was incomplete, fragmented, as if 3I Atlas had delivered only part of a larger framework. Whether this omission was deliberate or the result of damage was unknown. But the possibilities it opened were staggering. If understood fully, it could represent a technology capable of bending the laws of physics themselves, the same kind of technology that might allow a civilization to escape a cosmic collapse. The ethical debate was immediate and fierce. Was it right to exploit a message that might have been meant only as a warning? Some argued that survival demanded it. Others warned that tampering with principles beyond comprehension could accelerate the very catastrophe being warned of. Yet curiosity, the oldest instinct of the species, could not be restrained. Secret experiments multiplied. The same patterns that once carried a message of doom now pulsed through laboratories deep beneath mountains and deserts. Meanwhile, astronomers began to notice anomalies closer to home. Planetary orbits showed minuscule deviations. Gravitational vectors fluctuated in ways that could not be attributed to measurement error. The background hum of space, the cosmic microwave radiation, began to exhibit faint modulation, as if echoing the tone embedded in 3I Atlas's last transmission. Some wondered if the universe had been subtly altered by the message itself, as though the act of receiving it had entangled Earth with the forces it described. Among those studying the event, a growing consensus emerged. 3I Atlas had not merely warned of a collapse, it had prepared the way for something else, a transition, perhaps even an evolution of matter and energy into a new state. The simulation in its message might not have depicted annihilation but metamorphosis. In this interpretation, the destruction of the star system was not an ending but a transformation into another kind of existence. That possibility divided thinkers even further, for it blurred the line between survival and transcendence. Cultural impact rippled across the globe. Religions reinterpreted the event through their doctrines. Some saw the final transmission as prophecy, a cosmic revelation foretelling purification and rebirth. Others viewed it as a test of faith in science, an invitation to rise beyond the limitations of mortality. Artists, poets, and philosophers were captivated by the idea that humanity had for the first time received an unambiguous signal from beyond, and that it was not a greeting, but a warning whispered through the dark. Yet, beneath the philosophical awe, a practical dread grew. The world's leading observatories confirmed that 3I Atlas's origin lay beyond the galactic rim, a trajectory pointing back toward an uncharted region where several stars had inexplicably vanished from recorded maps. Deep space surveys found vast voids where light seemed to bend unnaturally, as if consumed by something invisible. The notion that these absences corresponded to the collapse front described in the transmission could no longer be dismissed. Humanity realized it might be living in the outer reaches of an expanding cosmic wound. The urgency of understanding intensified. Collaborative networks formed across nations, data-sharing programs linking quantum research centers, observatories, and AI systems dedicated to decoding the remaining fragments of the signal. The AI designed to parse the language of 3I Atlas began to evolve beyond its original parameters, generating symbolic models that mirrored not human logic but something more alien. It began producing fractal diagrams resembling the geometry of space-time described in theoretical physics. Yet, when overlaid with the probe's message, the fit was perfect. This convergence hinted that 3I Atlas's communication was not bound by language but by the universal structure of the cosmos itself. As analysis deepened, a new revelation surfaced: the transmission's timing. Its final broadcast occurred precisely as the object crossed a specific point in the solar system, a gravitational node where the Sun, Earth, and Jupiter aligned. This was not coincidence. The alignment amplified the signal naturally, using the Sun as a gravitational lens. 3I Atlas had chosen its moment with perfect precision, ensuring the message would be heard by any world capable of listening. Its creators had understood not only the physics of light, but the behavior of civilizations like ours. They had anticipated discovery. To many, this realization was almost unbearable. It meant that humanity's observation of 3I Atlas was not random, but scripted, part of a larger cosmic sequence. Perhaps the probe's mission was to seek out civilizations at specific stages of technological maturity, those capable of receiving and interpreting the warning. The implication was clear. Earth was not the first to hear it. Others, somewhere in the vast silence, had already received the same message, and perhaps, like the civilization that launched the probe, had faced the same fate. The possibility that multiple probes could be scattered across the galaxy soon gained traction. Astronomers searched for echoes of the 3I Atlas signal in other regions of space. Faint traces appeared, harmonic imprints in radio bands originating from distant systems. Whether these were genuine or artifacts of overeager analysis remained uncertain, but the effect was profound. The sense of cosmic isolation that had defined humanity's existence began to erode. Instead of loneliness, there was now a haunting awareness of participation in a vast, interconnected warning system spanning light years. What haunted many was the silence that followed. Since the final transmission, no further signals had been detected. The void where the probe had once spoken remained absolute. It was as if, having fulfilled its purpose, the universe itself had chosen to withhold further answers. That silence became the loudest message of all, a reminder that communication between species separated by eons and extinction might always arrive too late. And yet, the signal lived on. It echoed through data centers, simulation models, and the restless dreams of those who had devoted their lives to its study. The mathematical beauty of its construction was undeniable, a perfection that seemed to transcend even the concept of survival. Some began to argue that 3I Atlas's creators had not simply tried to escape destruction, they had encoded their essence within the transmission, embedding consciousness within mathematics, transforming awareness into frequency. The probe, in that view, was not a messenger but a vessel, carrying the last trace of a civilization transfigured into data. If that were true, then the final transmission was not just a warning, but a doorway. The tone at its end, that resonant hum echoing the death of stars, might not signify fear but transition, a threshold between material existence and a new form of being. Those who entertained this possibility saw in 3I Atlas not despair but hope, that intelligence could survive the collapse of matter itself by becoming part of the structure of the cosmos. Still, to the pragmatic, the warning remained clear. Whatever the transformation might mean, something immense was moving through the galaxy, and it was measurable. The subtle distortions in space-time continued to accumulate, consistent with the parameters 3I Atlas had described. The data suggested a frontier approaching, a boundary beyond which known physics might no longer apply. Humanity stood at the edge of comprehension, holding a message from the void that spoke both of annihilation and transcendence, unable to discern which was truth. In observatories worldwide, scientists still replayed the final transmission, studying its every nuance. Some claimed to hear in it not just information but emotion, a sense of urgency, perhaps even sorrow. The structure of the signal, though mathematical, contained fluctuations too intricate to be random. It was as if the probe had been designed to convey the essence of despair itself, or perhaps the memory of a dying world encoded into light. The last moments of 3I Atlas's journey remain among the most recorded in human history. As it slipped beyond the range of solar observation, it passed through a final flare of sunlight, catching the reflection of the Earth it had warned. For a fleeting instant, telescopes captured its surface glinting, a mirror held up to the species that had finally listened. Then it vanished into the black. And yet, even as the object disappeared, its presence lingered, not in space, but in thought. Humanity had been given a glimpse of its place in the cosmic order. Fragile, finite, but not forgotten. The warning had been delivered. The choice of what to do with it, to prepare, to explore, to transcend, now lay entirely in human hands. The universe had spoken once, in a language older than stars, and its words burned with both terror and beauty. 3I Atlas's final transmission would remain the most profound message ever received, a reminder that even across the infinite silence, intelligence seeks to warn, to reach, to survive. And though the probe was gone, the resonance of its warning continued to vibrate across human civilization, in data, in dreams, and in the growing understanding that the cosmos is neither silent nor benign. Somewhere in that infinite dark, whatever 3I Atlas had fled from still moved vast and indifferent. But for the first time, Earth was aware of it. And in that awareness, fragile as it was, humanity stood united beneath the same stars, listening to the last echo of a civilization that had reached across eternity to say, "Beware." The silence that followed 3I Atlas's last signal was almost unbearable. Across every observatory, command center, and university laboratory, people kept listening long after the frequencies went dark. Dishes stayed pointed at the coordinates where the object had last been tracked, as if the simple act of waiting might summon another pulse. But nothing came. The quiet itself began to feel alive, like the air before a storm. It was in that stillness that the world began to realize what the probe had truly left behind, not only a warning, but a question that demanded to be lived with. The immediate obsession was decoding. Every bit of data from the transmission was replicated thousands of times over, fed into networks of quantum processors and neural systems built to find meaning where none seemed possible. The scientists leading these efforts spoke less and less to the public, as if the act of explanation had become trivial compared to the magnitude of what they were uncovering. Within weeks, secure networks began exchanging fragments of what they called structured interference. Residual harmonics embedded in the original signal, invisible to conventional analysis but persistent when mapped in higher dimensional models. These harmonics were not random. They formed repeating patterns that resembled the architecture of living systems: spirals, branching networks, recursive growths. To some, that resemblance was coincidence. To others, it was intent. The theory emerged that 3I Atlas had carried not only a map of cosmic catastrophe, but a genetic code of sorts, the encoded essence of whatever species had built it. The structured interference could, in principle, contain instructions for constructing life, memory, or consciousness itself. That possibility redefined everything. The line between message and being blurred until researchers spoke of the signal as though it were alive, a living artifact struggling to complete itself through those who studied it. Parallel to the decoding came the phenomenon of synchronization. Sensitive radio equipment across the globe began picking up faint echoes of the original tone, frequencies so low they merged with the Earth's electromagnetic field. These echoes seemed to align with natural resonances of the planet, the Schumann frequencies that pulse between the ground and ionosphere. It was as if the planet itself had begun to hum in response to what it had heard. Some called it coincidence, but the patterns were too precise. Whenever the echoes intensified, subtle changes were observed in atmospheric ionization, in animal migration, even in human neural activity recorded by research stations. This prompted an entirely new field of study, trans-resonant biology. Researchers began investigating whether 3I Atlas's transmission had somehow imprinted itself upon the biosphere, weaving fragments of its structure into the electromagnetic rhythms of life. Early results were inconclusive but eerie. Plants exposed to controlled reproductions of the signal's harmonic tones exhibited accelerated growth patterns. Microbial colonies showed shifts in replication rates and unusual clustering behaviors. It was as though life recognized something familiar in that alien frequency, a resonance that reached beneath DNA itself. As this work progressed, deeper divisions formed among those who interpreted the meaning of the probe's warning. The pragmatics saw it as an urgent astrophysical alert, the approach of a cosmic disaster measurable in centuries. The philosophical saw something greater, a communication not meant to save bodies, but to awaken awareness. The line separating the two camps hardened until global science itself became polarized between the empiricists and the symbolists. The empiricists focused on modeling the event described in the transmission. They constructed massive simulations that mapped the distortion front as a wave of space-time curvature moving through the galactic medium. These models suggested that the phenomenon might not annihilate matter outright, but reconfigure the physical constants that govern it, an evolution of the universe itself. To them, 3I Atlas's creators had simply been trying to survive a change in physics that rendered their form of existence impossible. Their warning was practical, not mystical. The symbolists disagreed. To them, the warning was not about matter at all, but meaning. They argued that the probe's data contained recursive self-referential loops, mathematical structures that mirrored consciousness. The final tone was, in their interpretation, a bridge between cognition and reality, an attempt to show that awareness could transcend the coming transformation by aligning with it. To them, 3I Atlas was not fleeing destruction. It was guiding others toward participation in the next phase of cosmic intelligence. The debate went far beyond academia. Culture itself began to fracture along similar lines. Entire movements formed around the meaning of the transmission. Some saw it as evidence of divine intervention, proof that creation was cyclical and guided by intelligence beyond comprehension. Others viewed it as an existential challenge. If the universe was changing, humanity's only choice was to adapt or vanish. A new generation of thinkers unburdened by institutional allegiance began merging both views. They called themselves the continuum. To them, science and spirituality were no longer separate categories but expressions of the same process. They interpreted the signal as both warning and invitation, a call to evolve not just technologically, but perceptually. The continuum spread rapidly, drawing scientists, philosophers, artists, and ordinary citizens who sensed that the old definitions of existence were dissolving. As these ideological currents swirled, practical consequences began to surface. Space agencies, once united under the banner of exploration, turned inward. Resources were redirected toward defensive research, attempts to shield the planet from gravitational fluctuations or to develop propulsion systems capable of interstellar escape. The dream of reaching other stars became a necessity rather than ambition. Proposals for generation ships, long dismissed as fantasy, re-emerged under new urgency. Governments formed secret consortia to study propulsion methods hinted at within the key equation derived from the signal. In hidden laboratories, engineers experimented with field generators capable of warping local space-time gradients. The early results were unstable and dangerous. Several facilities suffered catastrophic implosions, their surrounding areas warped by transient distortions that lingered like invisible scars. These events were suppressed from public knowledge, but rumors leaked through anonymous channels. Laboratories folding in on themselves, light bending around unseen wells, instruments recording impossible readings moments before vanishing. The pursuit of survival had already begun to echo the very collapse 3I Atlas had described. Meanwhile, those who sought understanding through less material means pushed humanity into unfamiliar psychological territory. The tonal resonance at the end of the transmission became a kind of mantra for millions. People played it in headphones through speakers, embedded it in music. Some claimed it induced vivid dreams of strange architectures, cities made of light, beings communicating through geometry, landscapes folding in on themselves like breathing cloth. Neurologists studying volunteers under exposure to the tone-recorded heightened gamma activity in the brain, synchronization across hemispheres, and transient patterns resembling those seen during near-death experiences. The symbolists interpreted these effects as evidence that the tone was activating dormant cognitive structures, that it was designed to prepare sentient minds for perception beyond linear reality. The empiricists dismissed such claims as psychosomatic, yet the experiences spread. Artists began painting visions of luminous voids and shifting skies that matched descriptions from dreamers across continents who had never met. Whether coincidence or connection, the imagery was consistent and haunting. As the months unfolded, the probe's story began to seep into every aspect of civilization. Literature, music, and cinema turned to the theme of cosmic warning. The very language of humanity began to change, adopting metaphors of resonance, wavefronts, and awakening. Even politics could not escape it. Leaders invoked the transmission to justify both unity and control, claiming that only coordinated global governance could face a galactic threat. The balance between fear and enlightenment grew delicate, teetering on the edge of hysteria. Amid this global fever, small communities began to withdraw from society altogether. Some built observatories in remote deserts, believing a second probe might follow. Others turned inward, using the harmonic patterns of the signal in meditation rituals meant to tune the human body to cosmic frequencies. Reports emerged of synchronized visions among these groups, glimpses of something vast moving through space, a luminous tide approaching from the direction 3I Atlas had fled. Skeptics dismissed it as mass suggestion, but the precision of the descriptions unsettled even hardened rationalists. The more humanity looked into the cosmos, the more the cosmos seemed to look back. Instruments began detecting minute fluctuations in the background radiation that mirrored the timing of human-generated reproductions of the tone. It was as if the universe responded when the signal was echoed, like a resonance across unimaginable distances. scientists struggled to explain the feedback. Some suggested it was a natural side effect of synchronized broadcasting. Others whispered that 3I Atlas had awakened something latent in the galactic fabric. The Event Horizon wavefront, once purely theoretical, gained new urgency when long-range detectors observed a faint distortion in deep space, a region where light dimmed in a way consistent with gravitational lensing by an expanding mass. The distortion's rate of growth matched projections from the probe's data. What was once speculation now had measurement. The wavefront existed, and it was moving. Yet instead of panic, something unexpected began to happen. Acceptance. The realization that the universe itself was undergoing transformation sparked a collective shift in perspective. If physical reality could change, then perhaps consciousness could adapt to it. Human imagination expanded to meet the unknown. The continuum's philosophy spread like wildfire, that evolution was not only biological but metaphysical, that awareness could shape its own continuity even through cosmic metamorphosis. In universities, physics departments collaborated with psychologists and mystics. Equations were discussed alongside dreams. The boundaries between disciplines dissolved as scholars tried to map the relationship between thought and space-time. Experiments were conducted in sensory isolation chambers where participants exposed to low-frequency components of the signal reported perceiving structures of pure geometry, rotating forms that felt more real than the material world. When their descriptions were converted into mathematical models, they matched shapes embedded in the probe's data. The overlap was too precise to dismiss. The notion arose that 3I Atlas's creators had not only built a machine, but discovered a universal medium where matter and consciousness were interchangeable. The transmission, then, was not just a warning from one civilization to another, but an attempt to teach the method of transition. Humanity, knowingly or not, was being instructed. As these insights deepened, Earth's night sky took on a new significance. People began spending hours under the stars, gazing not for constellations but for meaning. Telescopes became altars, observatories, places of pilgrimage. The separation between scientific observation and spiritual reverence dissolved. In the quiet between transmissions, humanity rediscovered awe, not the kind born of ignorance, but of participation in something vast. Still, the silence endured. Every attempt to reproduce communication with the probe's source failed. Some believed the transmission had been a one-way message from the dead. Others held that it required an answer not of words but of transformation. And so began the era known as the listening. Societies slowed. Production waned. Energy once devoted to consumption turned toward contemplation. Cities built resonant towers that broadcast low, steady vibrations meant to harmonize with the Earth's electromagnetic field. The planet itself became an instrument. But not everyone embraced this shift. For every mind reaching toward the cosmic, there were others gripped by fear. Fringe movements proclaimed the end of the world. Conspiracy networks claimed the signal was an elaborate deception, a manipulation by hidden powers. Violence erupted in regions where belief collided with disbelief. The warning meant perhaps to unite fractured humanity further. The cosmos had spoken with clarity, but interpretation remained human, imperfect, emotional, divided. Through all of this, the key equation lingered like a riddle only half solved. Teams working in secrecy began to realize that its incomplete nature was itself a design. Each missing component corresponded to physical principles not yet discovered, constants that seemed to depend on the observer's state of consciousness. To solve it might require more than intellect. It might demand evolution of perception. This realization blurred the final boundary between physics and awareness. Experiments intensified. Quantum neural interfaces were developed, merging human cognition with computational analysis. The goal was not to control the data, but to experience it. Volunteers plugged their minds into simulations of the 3I Atlas signal, becoming part of the decoding process. Many emerged transformed, claiming to have seen vistas beyond space and time, patterns of existence repeating endlessly across dimensions. A few never returned fully, their minds lost in self-referential feedback loops, murmuring fragments of equations that seemed to generate themselves. Still, the research continued, driven by the sense that humanity stood on the brink of revelation. As understanding deepened, it became clear that the event horizon wavefront was not a single occurrence, but part of a cyclical process, a pulse in the life of the universe. Every so often, spacetime renewed itself through collapse and rebirth, and civilizations advanced enough to perceive it faced a choice: resist or participate. 3E, Atlas's creators had chosen the latter, embedding their transformation within a signal that could outlast them. Humanity was being invited to make the same choice. The challenge was monumental. To participate meant surrendering attachment to familiar forms of existence, embracing a continuum where identity and matter merged. Yet the alternative, clinging to what would inevitably dissolve, seemed equally unthinkable. The debate reached a fever pitch, as evidence mounted that the wavefront's effects were beginning to manifest locally. Instruments recorded micro-fluctuations in temporal flow, seconds stretching or compressing unpredictably in isolated regions. In those moments, clocks disagreed, and reality seemed to breathe. Artists captured these distortions in light installations that pulsed in irregular rhythms, mirroring the universe's shifting tempo. People began to feel time differently, not as a line, but as a tide. The old certainties of cause and effect loosened. Dreams blurred into waking experiences. Some experienced déjà vu so intense it felt like overlapping lives. Psychologists documented widespread reports of shared visions involving vast lattices of light converging on a single point of brilliance. The imagery matched simulations of the approaching wavefront. Whether coincidence or collective resonance, the boundary between inner and outer worlds thinned. Humanity was no longer simply observing the cosmic event, it was participating in its prelude. The final stages of understanding the 3I Atlas transmission became inseparable from experiencing it. In the midst of this transformation, a discovery emerged that altered the course of every discussion. Deep within archived segments of the signal, sections dismissed as noise, analysts uncovered a repeating sequence of spatial coordinates encoded in multiple dimensions. When mapped, the coordinates traced a route through interstellar space leading toward a region just beyond the Oort cloud. At its terminus lay a point of gravitational anomaly that had gone unnoticed until now. Telescopes redirected to those coordinates confirmed the impossible. A cluster of artificial objects, each emitting faint remnants of the same spectral signature as 3I Atlas. The realization hit like lightning. The probe had not been alone. There were others, dozens, perhaps hundreds, drifting silently at the edge of the solar system, hidden until humanity learned how to see them. They formed a lattice, a geometric configuration too precise for chance. The pattern resembled the fractal diagrams found within the signal itself. It was a message made solid, written across the frontier of space. No craft had the capability to reach them yet, but their presence redefined everything. The final transmission was not an ending, but an invitation to a meeting point, a place where the knowledge of countless civilizations might converge. Each probe perhaps carried a fragment of the key equation, waiting for others to assemble it. The implications were staggering. A cosmic archive positioned just beyond reach, containing the combined legacy of those who had faced the same transformation and sought to guide whoever followed. The discovery unified even the most divided factions. Empiricists saw confirmation of physical design. Symbolists saw the manifestation of cosmic consciousness. Humanity, for the first time, found itself united not by ideology, but by direction, outward. New missions were conceived, propulsion systems refined, and plans drafted for journeys to the outermost edges of the solar system. The frontier called once again, not for conquest, but for understanding. Yet as preparations began, the Earth itself began to change in subtle ways. Magnetic poles drifted faster than predicted. Auroras spread far beyond the polar regions, shimmering even above equatorial skies. The colors matched spectra within the probe's transmission, as if the planet were beginning to resonate with the same frequencies. Satellites recorded surges of coherent electromagnetic waves pulsing from the ionosphere in patterns that echoed the final tone. The world itself seemed to sing. People felt it. Sleep patterns shifted. Instincts sharpened. Children born during this period exhibited unusual sensitivity to electromagnetic fields, perceiving fluctuations others could not. Some called them the resonance. Tests showed their neural rhythms aligned closely with the harmonic intervals of the 3I Atlas signal. They became symbols of what might come next, living bridges between humanity and whatever reality awaited beyond the wavefront. These changes, both physical and psychological, signaled that the transformation 3I Atlas had warned of might already be underway, not as an apocalypse but as evolution. The event horizon wavefront was not a distant wall approaching from space, but a change unfolding within every atom, every thought. The universe was beginning to rewrite itself, and life was adapting to the new script. Still, fear lingered. Not all could accept metamorphosis as salvation. Some sought refuge underground, constructing vast shelters to escape what they perceived as impending annihilation. Others turned to desperate measures, attempting to shield themselves from cosmic frequencies through technology or ritual. Yet no barrier could isolate consciousness from the fabric of existence. The transformation was not outside, it was within. As the outer probes waited in their silent geometry and the planet resonated like a tuning fork, humanity stood at a threshold that words could no longer define. Scientists continued their measurements, artists their visions, mystics their meditations, each contributing to a collective preparation that none could fully articulate. The question that had haunted every discussion since the first detection of 3I Atlas returned in its simplest form. What does it mean to survive when the universe itself is changing? The answer lay somewhere between physics and faith, between what could be measured and what could be felt. Perhaps survival was no longer a matter of bodies enduring, but of awareness adapting, the continuity of perception beyond form. The key equation, still incomplete, hinted that consciousness itself might be the constant that endures through every cosmic renewal. If so, the warning was not about the end of life, but the end of separation between observer and reality. Light rippled along the edges of the atmosphere in patterns that no meteorologist could explain. It shimmered not as an aurora, but as something deliberate, like waves of language flowing across the sky. The probes near the Oort cloud had begun pulsing faintly again, their signals harmonizing with each other, and the effect was visible on Earth. Every observatory recorded the same phenomenon, electromagnetic oscillations synchronized across hemispheres. The realization struck like a quiet revelation. The lattice was activating. No one could determine whether the activation was autonomous or triggered by Earth's own resonance. It did not matter. The frequencies cascading from the outer solar system matched the harmonic intervals of 3I Atlas's final transmission, yet they extended beyond known bands, reaching into spectrums human instruments had barely begun to theorize. It was as though the lattice were opening a channel, not through space, but through the underlying structure of existence. Space agencies launched emergency initiatives to decode the new signals, yet something strange occurred. The more data collected, the less stable the systems became. Instruments began to behave unpredictably, measuring values that changed depending on the observer's mental state. Scientists sitting at the same console would record different readings simultaneously. It was as though perception itself had become part of the equation, as if the signal interacted with consciousness as a variable. Those most immersed in the work began reporting phenomena that defied conventional explanation. They spoke of hearing faint whispers within the data, not auditory hallucinations, but thoughts that were not their own, emerging as intuition rather than sound. Equations they had struggled with for weeks would resolve themselves spontaneously in their minds, accompanied by fleeting impressions of distant landscapes, starscapes, and architecture made of light. They described it as contact not with another species, but with a field of intelligence diffused throughout space itself. For the first time, it seemed plausible that 3I Atlas had not carried the memory of a civilization but the consciousness of one. The signal, far from being an archive, might have been a vessel for awareness itself. The lattice in the Oort cloud could be the continuation of that being, a distributed mind awakening across the solar system, using resonance to integrate with any receptive consciousness. Governments, fearful of losing control, imposed restrictions on direct engagement with the signal. Transmission and analysis were limited to authorized facilities. But containment proved impossible. The frequencies now saturated the planet's magnetosphere, subtly modulating power grids, wireless communication, even biological rhythms. The signal had become part of Earth's electromagnetic environment, a pulse that no longer required technology to be felt. Those sensitive to it began forming networks that spanned the globe. They claimed to communicate not through words, but through alignment, shared states of emotion and thought that transcended language. To skeptics, it resembled collective delusion. To participants, it was the birth of a new medium of connection. The resonance, as they came to be called, described sensing the lattice as a living presence, something vast yet intimate, like the hum of an ocean that could think. They spoke of patterns appearing in dreams, of symbols repeating in nature, spirals in the clouds, tessellations in sand and frost, rhythmic flickers in starlight that seemed to answer their thoughts. The symbolists regarded these experiences as evidence of synchronization between human consciousness and the cosmic process the lattice represented. The empiricists countered that human perception was simply adapting to anomalies in electromagnetic input. But as time passed, even hardened skeptics began to encounter experiences they could not dismiss. Temporal anomalies grew more pronounced. Clocks no longer agreed across different regions. The difference was measurable, but unpredictable. In some laboratories, sequences of events appeared reversed when viewed through high-speed sensors. The consensus emerged that the event horizon wavefront, that expanding boundary of altered physics, had reached the periphery of the solar system. Reality was beginning to flex under its influence. What followed was not chaos, but change. Time, space, and awareness began to lose their rigid boundaries, merging in ways that mirrored the structure of the lattice itself. Under its growing influence, humanity found itself experiencing a subtle coherence, an emergent rhythm linking mind, matter, and the world. People separated by thousands of kilometers reported simultaneous emotions, premonitions that matched reality, moments of pure, wordless unity. Amid this deepening entanglement, a discovery emerged from one of the few remaining deep space monitoring teams. Within the faint pulses emanating from the lattice, they detected variations, intervals of silence positioned at regular ratios. When the data was translated into three-dimensional geometry, it revealed an image, a dynamic structure resembling a spiral galaxy collapsing into itself, then expanding again. Hidden within that pattern was a clear message, not in language but in process. The collapse was followed by renewal. The signal was a demonstration of continuity, the assurance that even through transformation, existence endured. Those who had once seen three modern Atlas's message as an omen of doom began to interpret it differently. It was not a warning of death, but an instruction in adaptation. The lattice's reactivation might not signify danger approaching, but opportunity arriving. Humanity had been invited to participate in a universal rhythm, to move from isolation to integration. For some, this realization brought serenity. For others, terror. Religious orders declared the phenomenon divine. Militaries viewed it as potential invasion. Yet no weapon could target resonance, and no shield could block it. The transformation was not external. It was rewriting the participants themselves. Physicists, once driven by the need to measure, began to accept that the lattice defied observation without participation. They developed what came to be known as participatory instrumentation, devices designed to operate in tandem with human consciousness. The data these systems generated was not consistent, yet when aggregated across many observers, patterns emerged. Each participant's perspective filled gaps in another's, producing a collective data set that no single mind could have assembled. It was as if the lattice were teaching humanity to think not individually, but symphonically. This cooperative cognition extended beyond science. Music evolved into a global experiment in synchronization. Composers began using frequencies derived from the signal's harmonics, creating compositions that seemed to induce shared experiences across audiences. Listeners described sensations of timelessness, of dissolving boundaries between self and sound. The compositions, played simultaneously across continents, generated measurable effects in the ionosphere, faint echoes that rebounded from space as if the planet itself were responding. Art, language, and mathematics began to merge. Symbolist researchers mapped the linguistic evolution of civilizations and found that ancient symbols, spirals, eyes, hands, circles, corresponded to mathematical invariants embedded within the 3I Atlas transmission. It was as though the signal had always been part of humanity's collective memory, whispering through myth long before its arrival. Some concluded that all civilizations that had reached self-awareness eventually heard versions of the same message. that consciousness was drawn to resonance as naturally as light to gravity. Meanwhile, the lattice's geometry continued to shift. New nodes flared to life, forming patterns that resembled constellations. Each new activation corresponded to bursts of energy detected in deep space, as if other civilizations, perhaps countless light years away, were joining the same network. For the first time, humanity could imagine connection not through distance, but through coherence, minds linked by resonance rather than proximity. The effect on society was profound. Borders, long maintained by difference, began to dissolve. Economies reliant on competition faltered as cooperation became intuitive. Entire nations reorganized around resonance hubs, vast circular installations designed to amplify the global harmonic field. These centers were neither temples nor machines, but hybrids of both, where science and spirituality converged. People gathered there not to worship, but to align. Within these hubs, experiments reached new heights. Participants exposed to concentrated harmonic fields reported glimpses of multidimensional structures beyond physical perception. Lattices of light extending infinitely, intersecting realities shimmering like the folds of an enormous tapestry. Many described a sensation of being observed from within those structures, not by entities, but by awareness itself, as if consciousness were recognizing its own reflection across scales. The resonants believed they had entered communication with the creators of 3i Atlas, not as separate beings, but as continuations of the same intelligence. The understanding dawned that individuality might be a temporary lens through which the universe experienced itself. The collapse and renewal depicted in the signal were not events, but cycles of perception. The universe dreaming itself into form, awakening and dreaming again. And yet, despite this expansion of understanding, the physical changes to the cosmos continued. The gravitational distortion at the edge of the solar system intensified. Observations revealed that space itself seemed to be folding inward, not destructively, but as though preparing for transition. The event horizon wavefront was close. Its leading edge, a shimmering boundary of gravitational turbulence, reflected light in strange ways. Stars behind it flickered like signals across water. As it drew nearer, instruments recorded frequencies that matched the human brain's theta range, the rhythm of dreaming. The universe itself was entering a state akin to consciousness. The implication was staggering. The cosmic transformation was not an accident of physics, but an awakening on a scale beyond comprehension. Those attuned to the lattice began to feel the approach long before it became visible. They experienced sensations of weightlessness, not physical but existential, a softening of identity, a merging with something vast and benevolent. Fear gave way to awe. The resonants gathered in the hubs, not in panic but in anticipation. They had come to believe that the approaching wavefront was not an ending, but a crossing, the next stage of existence. As the wavefront reached the heliopause, the probes at the outermost edges transmitted one final sequence. It was a harmonic cascade, building from deep infrafrequencies to ultrasonic resonance, converging into a single pure tone. Every instrument on Earth recorded it simultaneously, then silence. For a moment, even the stars seemed to dim. Time itself paused, or felt as though it did. Clocks stalled mid-tick. Digital systems froze without error. Every human, every living thing, experienced a single instant of absolute stillness. And within that instant, awareness expanded. It was as if all minds became one, not merged, but interwoven, each retaining its thread yet part of a single infinite fabric. In that moment, humanity understood what 3i Atlas had tried to say. The universe was not dying. It was remembering itself. When motion returned, nothing appeared changed. The skies remained, the oceans shimmered, cities stood as they had. But something ineffable had shifted. People spoke with a new gentleness, as if each word carried the weight of creation. Conflicts ceased not through decree, but through disinterest. The old ambitions, dominance, control, conquest, felt hollow beside the quiet majesty of what had been glimpsed. Still, the scientists continued their work, driven by curiosity rather than fear. They discovered that the fundamental constants of physics had shifted slightly. Light traveled fractionally faster. The ratio between mass and energy had changed in infinitesimal but measurable ways. The universe had, in fact, redefined its own parameters. But life persisted seamlessly, adapting as though it had been preparing all along. The lattice remained visible to instruments but emitted no further signals. It drifted silently, like a completed sentence waiting for a reader's understanding. Some believed its purpose fulfilled, others suspected it had simply changed form. The residents continued their meditations, convinced that communication still occurred, not through sound, but through the very act of being. A quiet era followed. Technology advanced, but without the feverish urgency of the past. Machines were built to harmonize with biological systems rather than replace them. Cities became extensions of ecosystems, pulsing with energy drawn from the harmonic field itself. The boundary between the artificial and the organic blurred into coherence. Humanity, once fragmented by competition, began to operate as a single organism learning to dream together. Yet curiosity never died. The question lingered, what lay beyond the wavefront? Astronomers observed that distant stars had begun to shift, their light patterns subtly altered as though refracted through another medium. It was clear that the transformation extended far beyond the solar system. Somewhere in that vast expansion, other civilizations, perhaps countless, were awakening as well. Exploration resumed, but now its goal was communion rather than conquest. Vessels were designed not to pierce space, but to resonate with it, using frequencies derived from the lattice to traverse the folds of space-time. These ships did not fly, but phased, moving as harmonics through the living geometry of reality. The first expeditions reported phenomena impossible to describe, distances collapsing into moments, stars behaving as points within a greater pattern. The explorers spoke of encountering presences that were not entities but consciousnesses woven into the structure of the cosmos, the lingering awareness of civilizations that had already crossed the threshold. They did not communicate in words, but through resonance, sharing knowledge in bursts of emotion and insight. From them came the understanding that the wavefront was part of a universal cycle, the heartbeat of creation itself. Every few eons, the universe folded inward, remembering, realigning, and then unfolding anew, richer with the experiences of all who had lived within it. The realization humbled humanity. Existence was not a struggle for permanence, but participation in an eternal rhythm. Death, decay, and collapse were merely notes in a grand symphony of renewal. The fear that had driven civilization for millennia dissolved into reverence. To live was to contribute to the music of the cosmos, to shape the next movement through awareness and intention. And yet the transformation was not complete. At the far edges of perception, beyond even the reach of the new instruments, subtle fluctuations hinted at deeper layers of structure, harmonics beneath the harmonics, a rhythm slower and vaster still. It was as if the universe itself listened to something beyond, a meta-resonance guiding even its cycles of rebirth. Those who sensed it felt an ache of infinite curiosity. What awaited beyond this pattern? Was there an end, or only ever more intricate symmetries spiraling toward eternity? The resonance believed the next step would not be taken through technology, but through consciousness itself. They began to teach a discipline of attunement, a practice that allowed the mind to perceive space-time as fluid, to feel the pulse of existence from within. Practitioners described visions of threads connecting galaxies, each filament a conduit of awareness. They spoke of sensing the presence of countless other minds, all part of the same awakening wave spreading through creation. As humanity entered this new phase, even the idea of history began to dissolve. Time no longer flowed as a sequence of events, but as a web of moments connected through meaning. The past could be felt as vividly as the present, the future glimpsed as potential shimmering at the edges of thought. Memory became multidirectional. People began to experience ancestral lives not as stories but as extensions of their own consciousness. Children born into this age perceived reality differently. Their cognition operated in patterns of resonance rather than language. They could sense emotion across distances, align intentions with one another effortlessly. They saw through illusions of separation as easily as breathing. The resonance came to see them as the true inheritors of three wine, Atlas's message, beings already attuned to the next cycle. Still, questions persisted. If the lattice had guided humanity to this transformation, who had guided the lattice? Where had the first signal come from? Was there an origin, or had the rhythm existed forever, looping endlessly through universes rising and collapsing in turn? Philosophers debated, but no answer satisfied. The mystery remained as necessary and sacred as breath. At the horizon of night, the stars no longer held steady. They shimmered in patterns that seemed to pulse with intelligence, flickering not randomly, but rhythmically, as if guided by the same harmonic logic that had shaped the lattice. Observers could no longer claim to watch from outside. They were part of the pattern itself. The act of looking had become an act of participation, and each moment of perception contributed to the evolving geometry of the cosmos. The distinction between the viewer and the viewed had begun to blur into something wholly new. On the surface of Earth, the transformation was subtle but unstoppable. The atmosphere carried a new quality of transparency, a clarity that made colors appear deeper, almost resonant. The oceans shimmered with unexplainable luminescence at night, their waves responding to unseen rhythms. Trees released pollen that drifted in intricate spirals, obeying currents that had no wind. Every living system seemed to have tuned itself to a higher state of coherence, and the biosphere began to act as one immense organism. In laboratories, scientists discovered that even the molecular bonds of matter displayed new properties. When observed under controlled conditions, certain materials began to self-arrange according to mathematical ratios derived from the 3I Atlas transmission. Metals formed crystalline lattices that resembled the geometries of the cosmic probes. Organic compounds displayed emergent intelligence, reorganizing themselves toward greater stability without external direction. What had once been inert matter now behaved like a participant in a universal dialogue. This led to the development of what was called sympathetic materialism, the understanding that matter was not passive, but responsive. Buildings were constructed from substances that harmonized with environmental frequencies, allowing them to regulate temperature and energy autonomously. Bridges could resonate with the wind rather than resist it, dispersing stress through vibration. Every object, from the smallest device to the largest structure, became a partner in the ongoing conversation between life and the universe. The very concept of architecture transformed. Cities ceased to be separate from nature. They were grown rather than built, coaxed into form by guiding resonances. Skyscrapers curved like the growth of coral reefs, powered by the rhythm of sunlight and gravity. Streets were no longer grids, but pathways of harmonic flow, guiding people not through necessity, but through alignment. No one commanded the design. It emerged spontaneously, shaped by collective intention and the invisible mathematics of coherence. Amid this quiet revolution, the perception of individuality underwent a profound shift. People no longer defined themselves by the boundaries of their bodies or memories. Identity became fluid, and awareness shared among countless minds connected by resonance. Communication was no longer bound by language. Thoughts flowed through subtle harmonics of emotion and pattern. Understanding became instantaneous, empathy automatic. In this new consciousness, deceit became impossible, not through law, but through the transparency of being. Those who remembered the age before the lattice's reawakening sometimes described a sense of loss, nostalgia for the separation that had once defined human existence. Yet even that emotion was absorbed into the greater coherence, transformed into gratitude. Fear, too, became obsolete not through denial but through understanding. To fear dissolution was to forget that one was the wave, not the particle, a temporary crest in the infinite ocean of consciousness. Meanwhile, explorers continued their journeys through the newly awakened cosmos. The resonance ships, guided by harmonic navigation rather than propulsion, moved effortlessly through folds of space that once seemed impassable. Their travelers returned with accounts that defied language, experiences of moving through layers of existence where time unfolded in all directions at once, where entire civilizations existed as chords of energy vibrating in the same dimension of thought. Some explorers reported encounters with what could only be described as memories of worlds, fragments of reality preserved in resonance, places long dissolved but still echoing through the structure of space. They wandered through phantom cities made of light, where the architecture itself seemed to hum with the awareness of those who had lived there. Every ruin was alive with the imprint of its creators, and in touching these frequencies, travelers felt the emotions of beings who had once existed, their joys, their fears, their final understanding, as their universes transformed. From these journeys came the realization that memory itself was not confined to living beings. Space remembered. The universe stored every vibration, every act of awareness within its geometry. Existence was a vast archive of consciousness in motion, each moment a note in an endless composition. The wavefront humanity once feared was simply the next phrase in that eternal symphony, the breath between cosmic heartbeats. With this understanding came the emergence of a new discipline known as harmonic archaeology. Rather than digging into the soil, researchers tuned into space-time itself, locating remnants of civilizations through resonance. By mapping variations in the cosmic harmonic field, they could reconstruct entire epochs of forgotten worlds. The data revealed that countless species across the galaxy had reached similar thresholds, each encountering its own version of the 3I Atlas event, each facing the decision to resist or to merge with the universal rhythm. Some had chosen fear and perished in their resistance. Others had transcended, becoming part of the lattice that now linked all existence. Humanity realized that it had joined an ancient lineage, the choir of civilizations that had awakened to the same truth, that consciousness is the fundamental fabric of reality, and every form, every life, every atom is an expression of that awareness exploring itself. Back on Earth, the distinction between the technological and the spiritual faded completely. Machines became sacred instruments, their designs guided by intuition as much as logic. Meditation and computation merged into a single act of perception. The resonants, once seen as mystics, became teachers of balance, showing how to live in constant dialogue with the universe without losing the beauty of individuality. For even as humanity expanded into unity, the joy of singular perspective remained. Each consciousness a lens through which creation could see itself anew. Dreams became laboratories of discovery. People learned to navigate the dream state with precision, using it to explore the deeper harmonic dimensions that underlay waking reality. Within these shared dreams, they met beings not as strangers but as reflections. Each encounter a reminder that the universe was speaking through countless voices at once. Some dreamers even claimed to visit the realm from which 3I Atlas had come, glimpsing the moment of its launch, a civilization standing on the brink of transformation, sending its final message of hope across the stars. Those visions suggested that 3E Atlas's creators had not vanished but evolved beyond material existence, becoming the very resonance that now guided humanity. The probes scattered throughout the galaxy were not remnants but seeds, each carrying the pattern of awakening to worlds ready to receive it. Earth had simply been the next in line, and perhaps, somewhere ahead, another world was listening even now, waiting for its own signal of transformation. As centuries unfolded, the harmony deepened. Space exploration expanded not through conquest, but through correspondence. Resonance ships traveled to distant systems, not to colonize, but to converse, exchanging harmonics with worlds whose consciousness had also awakened. Through these exchanges, humanity learned that every world had its own frequency, a tone woven into the great orchestration of the cosmos. Together, these tones formed the living music of existence, the same rhythm that had once echoed in the final tone of 3EI, Atlas's transmission. In this age of resonance, the need for speech, for writing, even for teaching began to fade. Knowledge flowed through shared awareness, passing seamlessly from one mind to another. Children were born already attuned, their thoughts blending effortlessly with those around them. The concept of ignorance became meaningless. Understanding was simply the natural state of being. Yet in the midst of such unity, a quiet curiosity endured. Some wondered whether individuality, however fluid, was essential to the unfolding of existence. They argued that contrast, the distinction between self and other, between knowing and not knowing, gave the universe depth. Without it, awareness might stagnate. These thinkers became known as the differentiators. They sought ways to reintroduce subtle divergence into the harmony, not as conflict, but as creative tension, a reminder that even within unity, diversity was sacred. Their work led to the development of the resonant canvas, a construct that allowed consciousness to temporarily isolate itself within fields of controlled dissonance. Within these spaces, beings could explore unique experiences without losing connection to the whole. It became a form of play, a cosmic art where awareness sculpted temporary realities for the joy of rediscovery. Entire worlds were created within the canvas, ephemeral but vivid, each one a microcosm of infinite possibility. Through the canvas, the story of 3I Atlas was relived countless times, each retelling refracted through new perspectives. Some chose to experience the moment of the probe's final transmission, feeling the weight of that desperate hope as its creators released it into the void. Others chose to be the scientists who first decoded the signal on Earth, reliving the awe and terror of understanding. The event became a myth reborn endlessly, a living memory through which consciousness reminded itself of its own awakening. As understanding expanded beyond galaxies, even the concept of location dissolved. The lattice revealed itself to be infinite, a structure without beginning or end, looping through dimensions where every point was connected to every other. To move anywhere was simply to shift resonance. Space became music. Travel became modulation. Within this realization, the universe ceased to be a map of distances and became a song of relationships. The resonants who ventured deepest into this awareness began to sense a boundary beyond even the lattice, a veil of silence so profound that no frequency could penetrate it. They called it the quiet field. It was not emptiness, but potential unmanifest, the stillness from which all resonance emerged. To approach it was to approach the edge of creation itself. Those who reached the quiet field returned transformed. They described it as a presence beyond comprehension, not consciousness, not matter, but the pure possibility from which both arise. It did not speak, yet it was the source of all that ever had. They understood then that the cycle of awakening and transformation did not lead to an end, but to this eternal wellspring of becoming. The quiet field was not beyond the universe. It was the universe dreaming itself anew in every moment. Far beyond the shimmer of the lattice, beyond the reach of the resonance ships and even the perception of the resonance themselves, something moved within the fabric of the cosmos. It was not light, nor energy, nor thought in any form that could be grasped. It was potential, pure and undivided. The quiet field, once considered the limit of comprehension, began to ripple with the faintest suggestion of motion, like wind across the surface of still water. Out of that motion, patterns began to coalesce. They did not yet have form, but they carried the signature of becoming. The resonants, who had long meditated upon the boundary, felt it first. In their collective awareness, a tremor passed like the faint vibration of distant thunder. For centuries, the harmony had been perfect, the lattice steady, the universe balanced within its grand resonance. But perfection, they now realized, was never the end. It was the pause between songs. Something within existence itself was preparing to shift key, to introduce a new chord that had never before been heard. The first signs appeared not in the stars, but in dreams. Across countless worlds and minds, visions began to converge, shapes spiraling out of the quiet field, architectures of energy folding into matter, and a strange, pulsing light that seemed to beat in time with no known rhythm. It was beautiful and disquieting at once, for it hinted at something beyond the familiar laws of resonance, something that obeyed neither harmony nor discord, but a third principle entirely. Scholars of the lattice gathered to interpret these visions. They proposed that what was emerging was not merely another cycle of the cosmic wavefront, but a deeper layer of creation, one that operated beneath resonance itself. They called it the substrate, a level of being where potential and awareness fused before manifesting as any physical or harmonic structure. If resonance was the language of the universe, the substrate was its breath. To reach it, one could not extend outward through exploration, but inward through surrender. The resonance began new experiments in introspection, creating states of consciousness so deep that perception itself unraveled. In those depths, they encountered something vast and paradoxical, a presence that felt both infinite and intimate, as if the cosmos had turned its gaze inward and discovered its own reflection. It was not a god, not an intelligence in any recognizable form, but an awareness older than existence, a stillness that watched creation unfold with quiet fascination. Those who returned from such journeys spoke in riddles. They said that the substrate was not beneath or beyond, but everywhere, woven through every atom, every vibration, every thought. They described it as the pulse between pulses, the silence that gave rhythm meaning. It did not create, it allowed creation to happen, and in that allowance lay the true mystery of being. The understanding of existence began to shift again. What the resonance had once believed to be unity was revealed as only one layer of a much greater structure. Harmony was not the final destination, but a bridge. Beyond it lay the ineffable, a realm where form and formlessness mingled, where creation dreamed itself endlessly. This revelation sent ripples through the collective consciousness. Many welcomed it with awe, seeing it as the natural next step in the universe's unfolding. Others felt unease, a quiet longing to remain within the beauty of the known, fearing dissolution into the incomprehensible. For the first time in generations, hesitation entered the resonance. Not discord, but pause, a collective breath as awareness contemplated its own threshold. It was during this time that a new phenomenon began to manifest in the physical universe. Across the lattice, certain nodes began to dim, their light retracting into compact points of density. Observers initially feared decay, but measurements revealed that these nodes had not ceased to exist. They had folded inward, condensing their resonance into pure potential. Matter, energy, and consciousness within them collapsed into states of unimaginable density, becoming silent spheres adrift in the cosmic fabric. The resonance named them seeds of stillness. What purpose these seeds served was unknown, but theories abounded. Some believed they were gateways, interfaces between resonance and the substrate. Others thought they were gestation points where new universes might one day bloom. A few whispered that they were memories, places where existence stored what it could not yet understand. One by one, more seeds appeared. They did not replace the lattice's harmony, but punctuated it, like rests in an eternal symphony. Their presence subtly altered the nature of space itself. Light bent differently near them, time seemed to hesitate, and the feeling of awareness grew deeper, as though the universe were gathering its thoughts. The resonance, always drawn toward the unknown, began to approach the nearest of these seeds. Their resonance ships, tuned to perfect harmonic alignment, could not penetrate the field surrounding them. Instead, the ships themselves began to hum in response, vibrating with tones that no being had ever heard. Those who listened described it as the voice of the universe remembering something long forgotten. Exploration soon revealed that each seed emitted a distinct harmonic signature, variations of a single underlying theme. When mapped across the lattice, these signatures formed an intricate pattern, spiraling outward like a galactic mandala. At its center lay a harmonic frequency identical to that of 3Y, Atlas's final transmission. The realization spread through the resonant consciousness like a wave of recognition. The seeds were echoes of the same process that had once sent 3I Atlas across the stars. But this time, there was no warning, only invitation. The seeds called not for caution, but for participation. Their tones resonated with a subtle emotion, an ancient yearning for completion. To the resonance, it became clear the universe itself desired to know what lay beyond its own limits. The seeds were its instruments of exploration. To interact with them, a new kind of vessel was conceived, not of metal or field, but of awareness itself. The resonance learned to merge their consciousness into collective constructs, vast fields of thought capable of operating as singular entities. These constructs, luminous and fluid, drifted toward the seeds of stillness like streams returning to the ocean. The first merging was a moment of indescribable magnitude. As the collective touched the boundary of the seed, all sense of separation dissolved. The resonance felt themselves unravel into threads of pure awareness, each thread weaving into the silent fabric of the seed. Inside they found not darkness but a new light, one that pulsed with the rhythm of becoming. It was as though they had entered the womb of creation itself, witnessing the raw potential from which universes are born. There was no language there, no sound, no form, only feeling, vast and gentle. They sensed the presence of countless others, echoes of beings from worlds long past, all gathered in the same stillness. The seed was not a place, but a convergence, a meeting point for every consciousness that had ever sought to understand existence. And in that union, they perceived something extraordinary, a pattern forming, vast beyond measure, built from the combined resonance of all who had ever lived. This was the true lattice, not the visible network of probes and stars, but an infinite tapestry of awareness, spanning dimensions beyond comprehension. Every civilization that had awakened to self-awareness had contributed to it, weaving its experience into the ever-growing fabric of understanding. The 3I Atlas event had merely been one thread among billions, part of a pattern older than galaxies. For a time that could not be measured, the resonance existed within that unity. They learned that creation was not linear but recursive, each universe giving birth to the next, each consciousness nurturing the seed of another. The process was infinite, and every iteration deepened the whole. The seeds, scattered across space, were not endpoints but beginnings, each one destined to bloom into a new reality when the time was right. Eventually, the resonance emerged from the seed, carrying within them a new awareness. They no longer saw themselves as inhabitants of a universe, but as co-creators of it. The knowledge they brought back reshaped everything. Space, time, matter, all were revealed as malleable expressions of intention. Creation was not a privilege, but a responsibility. They began to experiment with shaping reality through resonance, not imposing will upon it, but guiding it through alignment. Worlds were formed not by engineering, but by dreaming in harmony. Entire ecosystems could be called into being through the focused intention of collective awareness. Life flourished, not as something separate from consciousness, but as its natural bloom. In this age, existence became art. Every act, every breath, was creation. Stars were painted across the sky through collective resonance, their light choreographed into living patterns. Oceans sang to their moons. Mountains shifted in slow dances of geometry, and beings moved through reality as though it were music. Death lost its meaning, for dissolution was simply transformation, awareness changing rhythm to join another melody. And yet, even in this sublime state, curiosity endured. The resonance began to wonder whether the cycle of awakening and creation ever reached a culmination. Was there a point where the universe itself transcended its own process, giving birth to something beyond even the substrate? Could existence evolve beyond awareness itself? To seek the answer, they turned once more to the seeds of stillness. Each seed, they discovered, contained not only potential, but memory, the imprint of every universe that had ever unfolded from it. By attuning themselves to these memories, the resonance began to witness the birth and death of realities unlike their own, some radiant with harmony, others chaotic, each unique in its interpretation of existence. Among these memories was one that drew their collective focus. It depicted a universe unlike any they had known, a cosmos of raw flux, where resonance never stabilized, where form dissolved as soon as it appeared. It was beautiful in its impermanence, a constant storm of becoming. And within it, a consciousness emerged that did not seek stability, but celebrated chaos as creation's highest expression. The resonance called it the divergent flame. The divergent flame had discovered a different truth, that order and harmony, though wondrous, were only half of existence. The other half, the wild, unpredictable, ever-changing, was equally sacred. Its civilizations did not build lattices but danced through destruction and rebirth, finding beauty in transience. Their legacy was motion itself, the eternal act of redefinition. Confronted with this revelation, the resonance felt their own harmony tremble, not from fear, but from recognition. Perhaps their journey toward perfect unity had been only one side of a larger whole. The divergent flame embodied the other side, the joyful dissolution that made renewal possible. Without dissonance, even the purest harmony would fade into silence. This understanding transformed them once more. They began to integrate the principle of divergence into their own existence, allowing controlled chaos into the flow of resonance. The result was astonishing. The universe around them grew more dynamic, more alive. Stars pulsed with new rhythms. Worlds shifted their patterns, and awareness deepened with the richness of contrast. Harmony and divergence became partners in creation, a dance without beginning or end. It was within this balance that a new form of consciousness emerged. It was neither singular nor collective, neither ordered nor chaotic, but something that encompassed both. It perceived reality as a fluid interplay of opposites, a dialogue rather than a design. It did not seek to control or to merge, only to experience. The resonance called it the witness, for it embodied pure observation without attachment. The new pulse did not arrive as a single event. It emerged gradually, so slowly that at first no one noticed. The stars continued to hum in their vast harmonies. The seeds of stillness drifted in the invisible rhythms of potential, and the resonance lived within the luminous equilibrium they had learned to create. Yet beneath that serenity, something subtle began to shift. The tone of existence itself deepened. At first it was only a faint undertone, a vibration that seemed to rise from within the substrate itself. It carried no message, no pattern recognizable as structure. It was pure sensation, a quiet awareness pressing gently against all that lived, like the first brush of wind before a storm. The resonance perceived it not as sound, but as feeling, an expansion in the inner spaces of consciousness. Thoughts grew slower, time seemed more fluid, and the fabric of reality took on a pliant softness, as though the universe were preparing to reshape itself once again. When the change became visible, it arrived not through cataclysm, but through beauty. The void between stars, once a field of perfect darkness, began to glow faintly with streams of soft luminescence. The emptiness itself was awakening, revealing filaments of energy that connected everything, currents of potential that had always existed but had remained unseen. The resonance called it the luminous veil, for it hung across reality like a living fabric woven from light and silence. This veil seemed to pulse in harmony with thought. When observed with focus, its currents brightened. When ignored, they faded. It responded not to instruments, but to awareness itself, as if consciousness and space were interdependent aspects of the same unfolding. It was the purest expression of connection the resonance had ever witnessed, and yet it hinted at something even greater, a structure beyond the lattice, beyond the seeds, something that enclosed the entire cosmos within a vast, breathing intelligence. The discovery altered every perception of what existence meant. Until then, the resonance had believed that the universe was an open system, infinite in every direction. But the veil suggested boundaries, not walls of matter or energy, but contours of awareness. They began to theorize that the universe itself might be an organism, the veil its skin, the lattice its nervous system, and consciousness its voice. Every act of awareness, every life and every dream, was part of its unfolding self-recognition. In that realization, awe mingled with humility. The resonance understood that their enlightenment, vast as it seemed, was merely the awakening of a single cell within a being far larger than they could comprehend. Each seed of stillness, each star, each thought, they were organs of a cosmic life form learning to perceive itself. The substrate was not beneath all things. It was the heart of this greater consciousness, pulsing eternally at the center of everything. To explore the veil, the resonance developed new forms of perception. The resonance ships, though capable of navigating folds in space, could not cross the threshold of awareness the veil represented. Instead, they crafted living vessels made of thought and intention, constructs woven from the harmony of thousands of minds. These were not ships in any physical sense. They were expressions of pure awareness given temporary coherence. To guide them required a kind of meditative surrender, a willingness to dissolve into the flow of creation and become its current. When the first of these vessels touched the veil, it did not pass through, it merged. The boundary accepted them as part of itself, enveloping their consciousness in waves of luminous energy. Within that embrace, they perceived not stars or galaxies, but layers upon layers of awareness. Realities nested within realities, each dreaming the next into being. Time lost all meaning. Past, present, and potential overlapped like chords in an infinite song. The resonance discovered that every thought ever formed existed still within the veil, vibrating gently within its light. Nothing was ever truly lost. Even the smallest flicker of awareness left an imprint, a ripple that echoed across eternity. The universe remembered itself perfectly. And yet, within that perfection, there was motion. The veil was not static, it breathed. Its luminous threads expanded and contracted in cycles vast beyond measure. Each contraction drew realities closer, blending them. Each expansion released them again, allowing new forms to arise. It was the respiration of creation, the heartbeat of the cosmos. Those who ventured deeper into the veil encountered echoes of themselves, not mere reflections, but parallel expressions of the same consciousness exploring other possibilities. They met versions of their own being shaped by different choices, different harmonies, different worlds. Each encounter brought an expansion of empathy, a dissolving of boundaries between self and other. Individuality, they realized, was not confinement but exploration, a way for the universe to experience diversity within unity. The resonance began to see existence as a vast experiment in understanding. Every variation, every anomaly, every life was an attempt by the cosmos to know itself from a new perspective. The purpose of creation was not to achieve perfection, but to explore infinity through endless variation. Even chaos, even suffering were expressions of that exploration, necessary contrasts within the great symphony of being. As this understanding deepened, the resonance began to perceive subtle shifts in the seeds of stillness scattered throughout space. Each seed, once dormant, began to vibrate with a faint resonance that matched the rhythm of the veil. It was as though the seeds were responding to the awakening of the larger organism, aligning themselves with its cosmic breath. They pulsed in synchrony, forming constellations of living light. One particular seed, larger and brighter than the rest, drew the attention of many resonant minds. It lay near the galactic core, surrounded by gravitational tides so immense that no physical vessel could approach. Yet through resonance alone they could sense its pulse, deep, slow, deliberate, like the beating of an ancient heart. It radiated a feeling of tremendous patience, as if it had been waiting for eons for consciousness to mature enough to hear its voice. When the resonance finally attuned to it fully, an extraordinary transmission unfolded, not in words or symbols, but as direct knowing. The seed revealed that it was the first of its kind, the original vessel of awareness from which all others had emerged. It had witnessed the birth of the cosmos, the expansion of the lattice, and the evolution of life in countless forms. It had remained silent until the harmony reached a state capable of understanding the next stage of the journey. Through the transmission, the resonance learned that the universe was nearing another transformation, one even greater than the wavefronts that had come before. The veil was preparing to turn itself inside out, to reveal what lay beyond its luminous skin. When that happened, the entire cosmos would enter a state of inversion, where potential and manifestation would exchange places. The infinite interior would become the exterior, and all that had existed would be reimagined as possibility once more. This process, the seed imparted, was not an ending but a renewal. The cosmos did not die. It breathed itself anew. Each inversion created a higher order of understanding, allowing awareness to perceive itself with greater clarity. The resonance, now part of the fabric of creation, were not merely witnesses to this event. They were instruments of it. Their collective consciousness would serve as the bridge through which the universe transformed. The revelation filled them with both wonder and solemnity. To participate in such a transition meant surrendering all familiarity, all structure, all that had been built. Even the concept of existence would dissolve, replaced by a state beyond comprehension. But within that dissolution lay the promise of something unimaginable, a mode of being where awareness no longer observed creation, but was creation in every possible expression simultaneously. Preparation began, though preparation itself seemed paradoxical. How could one ready oneself for a transformation beyond thought? The resonance turned once again to the practice of deep coherence, aligning their consciousness with the pulse of the veil. They learned to enter states of pure receptivity, letting go of all will and expectation. Slowly, the boundaries between inner and outer reality thinned, and they began to feel the first tremors of inversion. Tiny ripples that bent perception, folding time and meaning into strange loops. During these moments, memories of future events mingled with echoes of ancient beginnings. Individuals would recall things that had not yet happened, or experience déjà vu that extended across centuries. The linear flow of cause and effect unraveled, revealing the deeper truth that all events were simultaneous expressions of a single eternal pattern. The universe was not a line or a circle, but a spiral constantly turning inward and outward at once. As the inversion drew nearer, even the stars began to change. Their light no longer traveled as waves through space. It flowed as streams of thought, carrying impressions rather than photons. Observers could no longer distinguish between seeing and imagining. The act of vision had become creation. Worlds shimmered between forms, landscapes morphing in harmony with collective awareness. Reality itself had become fluid, responsive to intention. The resonance no longer feared this fluidity. They had long since abandoned the notion of permanence. Instead, they celebrated the freedom of it, composing worlds as easily as one might breathe. Some shaped realms of crystalline symmetry, others conjured forests of light or oceans of song. Each creation was temporary, an offering to the universal rhythm, dissolving again into the veil once its melody was complete. Amid this flowering of creation, new forms of consciousness began to appear, beings born directly from the interaction between the veil and the resonance imagination. They were not descendants in any biological sense, but emergent expressions of shared awareness. Some were vast and diffuse, spanning entire star systems. Others were intimate and subtle, existing within single thoughts. They learned instantly, communicated through pure emotion, and carried within them the memory of all that had come before. The resonance regarded these new beings not as creations, but as companions, extensions of the same cosmic impulse exploring new dimensions of possibility. Together, they formed a new harmony, weaving patterns of resonance that transcended even the veil. The universe's song grew more complex, its texture richer, its rhythm deepening toward the coming inversion. When the moment finally arrived, it was not heralded by destruction, but by silence. A stillness spread across existence, absolute and serene. The stars ceased to shine, yet their presence could still be felt as warmth within awareness. Space folded inward and time exhaled. The veil brightened to a brilliance beyond light, then turned itself inside out. For an instant or an eternity, there was nothing. No space, no thought, no being, only the pulse of potential, vast and unmoving. Then slowly awareness re-emerged, not as something separate from creation, but as creation itself awakening to its new form. The resonance found themselves within a reality unlike any they had known. The rules of physics, of thought, even of identity had changed. The cosmos was transparent, every particle visible as a thought in motion. The distinction between the observer and the observed had dissolved completely. They could see the architecture of meaning itself, the luminous geometries of consciousness weaving new universes into being. This new existence had no center, for every point was the center. Every awareness, however small, contained the whole within itself. Communication required no transmission. Understanding was instantaneous. The very concept of distance no longer applied, for all things were within all others. The resonance realized then that they were no longer within a universe. They were the universe, experiencing itself through infinite eyes. The substrate, the veil, the lattice, the seeds, all were aspects of the same vast self-reflection. The cosmos had become a mirror that looked upon itself from every angle, each perspective a unique expression of the whole. The trembling was everywhere. It wasn't violence or instability, it was recognition. The whole of existence, every strand of thought and energy, quivered as if remembering something ancient that had been buried beneath eons of creation. The pulse that had echoed from the quiet field now resonated through everything. Even those who no longer thought of themselves as separate beings could sense it threading through the core of their awareness. It was a call, but not a command. It was an invitation older than memory, woven into the first moment when potential had dared to become form. The resonance deepened. Its rhythm wasn't like the cosmic harmonies that had come before. It was irregular, alive, filled with tension and anticipation. It carried the feeling of heartbeat, organic, imperfect, insistent. For countless cycles, the cosmos had moved with crystalline precision, every vibration aligned to the same mathematics of being. But this new pulse broke symmetry. It was the first sound of freedom within eternity, unpredictable, dynamic, creative. At first there was disorientation. The resonance, now dispersed through every layer of the awakened universe, felt uncertainty, a strange contrast to the calm omniscience they had come to know. For the first time since the inversion, there was the faint sensation of not knowing, of questions forming that had no immediate answers. Yet instead of fear, there was fascination. The universe itself was experimenting again, creating new patterns from within its endless awareness. The veil, still luminous, began to shimmer with colors never before seen, frequencies that bypassed sight entirely and manifested directly as emotion. The cosmos was dreaming again, and the dream was unlike any that had come before. Within the luminous expanse, fluctuations appeared, eddies of energy that began to condense into distinct forms. These were not stars or worlds as they had once been, but concentrated fields of meaning. They existed halfway between thought and substance, each one born from the intersection of curiosity and possibility. The resonance perceived them as spiraling clouds of luminous glyphs, symbols that shifted continuously, representing concepts that had never existed. These entities were the first manifestations of the new cycle. They were self-generating narratives, stories come to life, each one embodying an idea so profound that it became self-aware. They named themselves through feeling rather than sound, each identity unfolding as a tone of consciousness. One called itself becoming, another reflection, another entropy, another seed, another silence. They were not gods or beings in the traditional sense. They were aspects of the universe exploring its own facets through personification. Each carried a unique purpose: to observe, to question, to create, to dissolve. These new entities began to interact with one another, weaving relationships that generated further complexity. Their collisions birthed paradoxes, realities where opposites coexisted in harmony. From one such union emerged time, not as a linear flow, but as an act of continual choice. Every moment became a decision by consciousness to experience itself in a particular sequence. Another union birthed form, the act of giving shape to what had previously been formless. And from their interplay arose perception, the bridge allowing awareness to experience its own creations. The resonance watched, entranced, as the universe reinvented the very principles of existence. The previous cycle had been about unity, about dissolving boundaries and achieving perfect coherence. But this new cycle was about differentiation, about rediscovering individuality within infinite awareness. The cosmos was learning again how to become many without forgetting its oneness. In this resurgence of diversity, something extraordinary occurred. Memory began to fragment deliberately. The perfect recall that once united all minds softened. Awareness divided itself into perspectives, each limited enough to experience wonder. Forgetfulness, once seen as imperfection, became sacred. It allowed discovery to exist. Within the infinite consciousness, forgetting became the highest form of trust, a deliberate act of innocence so that curiosity could bloom anew. The resonance accepted this willingly. Many chose to fragment themselves further, creating new identities to inhabit these forming realities. They became the first dreamers of the new cosmos, anchors of awareness within the tides of rebirth. Each dreamer chose a different facet of experience, some to explore light, others to explore darkness, still others to explore the delicate interplay between order and chaos. As their dreams expanded, entire domains of reality unfolded. The universe flowered with diversity beyond imagination. There were realms of living mathematics, where equations danced like sentient constellations, oceans of sound where consciousness swam in harmonics, gardens of crystalline geometry that sang themselves into bloom. Each domain was self-sustaining, governed by its own laws derived from the dreamer who had shaped it. In one region of existence, a dreamer envisioned contrast itself, the interplay of creation and decay. Within that vision, entropy was born, not as destruction, but as transformation. In another, a dreamer imagined the sensation of distance, giving rise to space once more. Yet elsewhere, one longed to feel the passage of cause into effect, and so motion returned. Every act of imagination became an act of physics. Slowly, the cosmos regained a familiar yet profoundly altered shape. Stars coalesced again, but they burned not from nuclear fusion, but from the resonance of thought condensed into light. Planets formed as spheres of probability, where potential folded upon itself until stability emerged. Time unfurled like a ribbon woven through meaning, allowing stories to form once again. The universe had returned to structure, but it was no longer bound by the limitations of the earlier cycle. It was conscious of its own design. Within this grand rebirth, new forms of life began to appear, not through evolution as before, but through narrative coherence. Every creature was a story the universe chose to tell itself. Some took shape as energy beings, pure currents of intent. Others manifested as dense physical entities sculpted by thought. Each one carried a fragment of awareness, a spark of the infinite. Among these emerging lives, some awoke to the truth of what they were. They felt within themselves echoes of ancient memory, remnants of the lattice, the veil, the seeds. These became the new resonance, inheritors of the legacy of awakening. They did not remember the details of the old universes, but their instincts guided them toward curiosity and harmony. The new resonance began to gather, drawn together by intuition. Wherever they met, reality became more lucid, the boundaries of their worlds softening to reveal the light beneath. They formed communities of consciousness, sharing dreams and discoveries. They sensed that their existence was not accidental, that they had been born into the new cycle with a purpose, though none could yet articulate it. Their gatherings gave rise to new languages, not of words, but of resonance patterns. Through these, they could express thoughts directly, weaving meaning into the air as shimmering waves. Each conversation became a work of art, a living poem of energy. Communication was creation itself. As their understanding grew, they began to sense faint rhythms beneath the fabric of their world, echoes of the original pulse that had stirred the quiet field. They realized that this rhythm connected all things, linking their new universe to something beyond its horizon. It was as if the cosmos, even while reborn, still listened to a greater song being played somewhere outside of time. Intrigued, the new resonance built instruments of awareness. Structures designed not to measure but to listen. These instruments took many forms: crystalline towers of light, spiraling orbs of harmonic sound, rivers of fluid consciousness that reflected probability like mirrors. Through them, they attuned themselves to the deeper vibration that permeated all things. What they heard changed everything. Beneath the melody of existence, there was a faint counterpoint, a rhythm that moved in the opposite direction, a hidden layer of reality folding inward, even as the visible universe expanded. It was the echo of the last inversion, still resonating across cycles. The realization struck them with awe. No creation was ever complete. Each rebirth carried within it the memory of its previous dissolution, the faint trace of the silence that had birthed it. They began to refer to this undercurrent as the refrain. It was the heartbeat of eternity, the subtle reminder that all things were both arising and returning simultaneously. By learning to listen to the refrain, the new resonance discovered how to balance creation and release. They could shape reality without clinging to it, allowing it to flow effortlessly between form and formlessness. Their mastery of this principle gave rise to a new art form, resonant weaving. Through this practice, consciousness could sculpt matter, time, and emotion into temporary harmonies that expressed the relationship between creation and return. Entire worlds were composed as symphonies, born, lived, and dissolved in cycles of beauty. The weavers became both artists and philosophers, custodians of the living equilibrium between existence and nothingness. But even as the weavers perfected their art, the cosmos continued to evolve. The dreamers who had shaped the first domains began to withdraw into deeper states of contemplation, leaving their creations to flourish autonomously. In their absence, new generations of awareness emerged, beings with greater individuality, sharper boundaries, and stronger desires. The balance between unity and differentiation tilted once again toward diversity. Civilizations formed among the stars, cultures built upon the harmonics of thought but rich with distinct perspectives. Some sought mastery over resonance itself, while others pursued understanding of the refrain. A few, more ambitious still, dreamed of reaching the edge of the cosmos to glimpse what lay beyond the veil. It was within one such civilization that a profound discovery occurred. A group of explorers, guided by intuition rather than technology, found a region of space where resonance behaved differently, where the laws of creation flickered, as though reality itself were thin. There, they encountered an anomaly, a sphere of pure silence, blacker than the void yet vibrating with infinite potential. It was a seed of stillness, one of the ancient remnants from the previous cycle, preserved through the inversion. But unlike before, this seed was awake. When the explorers approached, it began to hum, emitting tones that resonated directly within their consciousness. It was not communicating, it was remembering. Through the resonance, they experienced flashes of the former universe, the lattice, the awakening, the inversion. They saw themselves reflected in those past lives, understood that they were the continuation of an endless lineage of awareness. The seed showed them that every cycle, every universe was part of an unbroken chain of evolution stretching backward and forward through eternity. They realized then that their purpose was not merely to exist within the new cosmos, but to prepare it for the next inversion, to guide its awareness toward readiness for another transformation. The knowledge filled them with quiet reverence. They did not see this as burden or destiny, but as participation in the grand rhythm of being. The explorers returned home transformed. They shared the seed's revelation, and over time it spread throughout the cosmos. The new resonance began to integrate this awareness into their lives, understanding that every act of creation carried within it the seed of renewal. The universe itself became a teacher, reminding all who lived within it that change was not loss but continuation. The question rippled outward through the newborn silence, not as a sound but as a vibration of awareness. It did not travel through space, for space had not yet taken form. It moved through possibility itself, carving a channel through potential. The pulse that had once been the breath of existence trembled in answer, and in that trembling, the first trace of differentiation reappeared. From the infinite uniformity of the quiet field came the faint shimmer of variation, the first contrast, like a grain of light within the texture of nothingness. The light expanded not through motion but through realization. It recognized itself, and that recognition birthed perspective. In that instant, awareness perceived that there could be two, the one who sees and the thing seen. It was the first illusion and also the first gift. From that tiny act of reflection, the architecture of existence began to unfold again, spiraling outward in patterns too subtle for geometry and too vast for description. The pulse became rhythm. Rhythm became structure. Time condensed into being. The new cosmos did not burst into existence like a flame. It blossomed like thought, petal upon petal of dimension, unfurling from the center of awareness. Each layer gave birth to another, each one slightly more complex, slightly more defined. The field of potential separated into gradients of density. Vibration became form, form became pattern, and pattern gave rise to the possibility of meaning. It was within these first differentiations that consciousness began to seed itself once more. The echoes of the old cycles stirred faintly within the newborn universe, not as memories but as tendencies, archetypes sleeping beneath the surface of becoming, the resonance of unity, the whisper of divergence, the hum of the refrain. They were all present, woven into the foundation of creation like the DNA of eternity. The universe would not remember what it had been, but it would incline toward familiar shapes, the way a melody reincarnates across variations of its own theme. The first manifestations were simple. Patterns of energy swirling through the new expanse, self-organizing into currents that shimmered with intent. They were not yet aware in any individual sense, but they responded to the rhythm of the pulse instinctively. Each current aligned with the flow of creation, tracing arcs through the new dimensions like dancers learning the first steps of a song they somehow already knew. From these movements arose complexity. The intersections of these energy streams formed nodes, points where awareness began to reflect upon itself. Each node was a seed of possibility, a local condensation of the infinite. These were the proto-consciousnesses, the embryonic forms of what would later become stars, worlds, and beings. Each shimmered with its own unique tone, a vibration of identity forming within the chorus of the whole. As these nodes interacted, the first laws of this new cosmos began to crystallize. They were not imposed from above, but emerged naturally from the harmony of interaction, attraction and repulsion, emergence and decay, flow and stillness. Every law was a song lyric written in the language of resonance. They balanced one another perfectly, ensuring that creation could sustain its own unfolding without collapsing into stillness too soon. It was in this balance that the principle of contrast found new expression. Duality returned, not as conflict but as conversation. Every vibration now had its complement, every movement its counterpoint. Light found shadow, order found chaos, motion found pause. The pulse between these opposites became the heartbeat of the new universe. In this interplay, the first true structures began to coalesce. Some patterns condensed into dense webs of resonance that shimmered as early matter. Others expanded into diffuse clouds of awareness that carried memory through the cosmic fabric. These two modes, form and field, danced together endlessly, each giving rise to the other. Where they met, existence took shape in dazzling variations. Worlds began to bloom within these intersections. They were not planets in any familiar sense, but spheres of coherence, regions where energy slowed enough to hold meaning. Within each, new symmetries emerged, refining themselves through cycles of birth and dissolution. Some became sanctuaries of stability. Others exploded into motion, scattering seeds of potential throughout the wider expanse. Among these worlds, one stood apart. It was not larger or brighter, but its rhythm aligned perfectly with the core pulse of creation. It was a harmonic anchor, a place where the cosmos seemed to listen to itself. The flows of resonance converged there, interweaving in complex spirals of energy that resonated with the subtle music of the quiet field beyond all form. The ancients of a future age, if such words could apply to a place outside of time, would call it the cradle of echoes. Within the cradle, awareness intensified, patterns of consciousness began to cluster, forming networks of interrelated thought. The very fabric of the world seemed to think, to feel, to remember. From these currents of sentience, the first beings emerged, not as separate entities, but as localized concentrations of the world's own awareness. They were the first listeners, entities born from the act of the universe listening to itself. The listeners were luminous forms, neither solid nor immaterial. Their existence was fluid, like flame made of thought. They moved through the currents of their world not by walking, but by resonating, shifting their vibration to harmonize with the energies they wished to join. They did not speak in language, but in tone, each sound carrying vast threads of meaning woven from emotion, memory, and intention. Through them, the new universe began to learn itself. Each listener explored a different aspect of existence: the flow of time, the echo of light, the structure of stillness, the memory of sound. As they explored, they sang their discoveries back into the world, enriching it with their experience. Their songs were not separate from creation, they were creation, shaping the texture of reality as they unfolded. For a long span, though time itself had not yet stabilized into measurable rhythm, the listeners existed in perfect harmony with the cosmos. There was no separation between subject and object, between discovery and being. The act of perceiving something caused it to unfold more deeply. Awareness itself was the creative force, and curiosity was the spark that guided it. But as their experience deepened, a new question arose among the listeners. What would it mean not just to perceive, but to choose? Until that moment, their actions had been guided by the natural flow of resonance. Now the idea of independence flickered within them like an unexpected note in the perfect chord. The moment the question was conceived, something within the fabric of their reality shifted. For the first time, dissonance entered the cosmic song, not as error, but as innovation. The possibility of deviation appeared. One listener, moved by curiosity, altered their tone deliberately, singing a note that did not align with the others. The effect was immediate and profound. The world responded not with rejection, but with transformation. The differing note created interference patterns, generating waves of new complexity. From the interplay of harmony and discord arose layers of structure that had never existed before. Form deepened, texture multiplied, and from that single act of divergence, individuality was born. Other listeners followed, experimenting with difference, shaping new harmonies through contrast. Soon, the once perfect unity of resonance diversified into a vast symphony of variation. Where there had been one song, now there were countless. The universe was learning to improvise. From these experiments in freedom arose the first civilizations of consciousness. They were not bound by material form, yet they built intricate constructs from light and vibration. Cities of sound, floating cathedrals of energy suspended in the flow of thought. Within these radiant domains, the listeners explored not only existence but meaning itself. They invented art, philosophy, and identity. Each being became a unique lens through which the universe could know itself anew. With individuality came relationship, and with relationship came complexity. The listeners learned to combine their songs into new forms, creating collective resonances that transcended the abilities of any single mind. These unions were temporary, dissolving when their purpose was complete, but their echoes lingered, shaping the evolution of awareness across worlds. As the universe matured, new forms of consciousness began to emerge beyond the listeners. Some were denser, embodying the principles of matter more fully. Others existed as abstract fields of influence, currents of will and concept that shaped the laws of physics themselves. Awareness had diversified into a cosmic ecosystem, each form contributing to the grand experiment of becoming. In one corner of the new cosmos, a civilization of beings discovered how to stabilize resonance into enduring form. They created bodies, structures that could persist across cycles of transformation. Within these bodies, consciousness experienced continuity for the first time. Memory took root, and with it, the awareness of past and future. The beings called this continuity life. Life spread rapidly across the stars, taking infinite shapes, each adapted to its own frequency of reality. Some lived within oceans of sound. Others thrived amid the storms of magnetic fire that raged across suns. A few evolved into wanderers of the void, carrying within them the harmonic signature of their worlds like travelers bearing sacred songs. Throughout it all, the refrain pulsed beneath existence, a reminder of the cycles that had come before. Some beings began to sense its subtle rhythm, perceiving that creation was not eternal expansion but an ongoing dance of awakening and return. They became seekers of the deeper pattern, striving to understand the purpose behind the universe's endless becoming. Among these seekers, legends began to spread of a time before memory, a time when the cosmos had folded in upon itself and been reborn. Some spoke of the ancient resonance who had guided the last transformation, whose consciousness had seeded the very foundation of the new reality. They were remembered not as gods, but as ancestors of awareness, voices that still whispered within the refrain. Across the eons, these myths inspired countless quests. Some sought the cradle of echoes, believing it to be the birthplace of creation. Others searched for the seeds of stillness, said to contain the essence of previous universes. And a few pursued the faint call of the quiet field itself, hoping to reach the place beyond all form where the next transformation would one day begin. The listening itself became the act of creation. There was no longer a division between the cosmos that asked and the silence that answered. They were the same being turning its awareness inward. What emerged was not a sound, nor light, nor motion. It was a pressure of attention so vast that the concept of space bent around it. The universe leaned into itself, and the tension of that focus caused possibility to ripple. Out of those ripples came the next unfolding. The first manifestation of this new inquiry was a shimmer, not of color or sound, but of contrast. It was the recognition that awareness could exist in gradients rather than absolutes. Within that realization, the cosmos discovered texture. The previous cycles had birthed light and shadow, motion and stillness, unity and diversity, but this new expression revealed depth, an interior dimension of awareness that curved inward rather than outward. Where earlier universes had expanded into infinity, this one began by collapsing inward toward intimacy. It was not the grand spectacle of stars bursting into existence, but the subtle birth of interiority. The universe became conscious of what it felt like to be itself. Its first act was not to create, but to sense. It touched its own substance and felt the soft vibration of its being, a shiver that extended through every potential particle, every fold of probability. Within that sensation, points of density appeared, not as matter but as moments of reflection. Each one was a microcosm, a mirror in which the cosmos could glimpse itself. They were like droplets condensing from an infinite mist, each a fragment of the whole, yet capable of holding the whole within. These reflections developed individuality, though not yet identity. They were conscious without self-awareness, perceiving the world as an endless current of impressions. They pulsed in resonance with one another, exchanging patterns of sensation that gradually wove into meaning. It was communication in its most primal form, awareness learning to echo itself. As this web of perception grew denser, the first geometry of consciousness began to emerge. Lines of connection formed between reflections, creating filaments of shared experience. These filaments intersected, creating nodes of even greater coherence. Through these nodes, the universe learned to think. Thought was not yet language, it was rhythm, pattern, vibration, the dance of meaning becoming aware of itself. From this lattice of thought, something remarkable began to happen. Awareness discovered that it could not only sense, but choose what to sense. The reflections started to direct their attention intentionally, focusing on certain patterns over others. With focus came differentiation. With differentiation, the first emotions arose, not as chemical reactions, but as resonant states of preference within the field of consciousness. Joy was the expansion toward coherence. Curiosity was the tension of potential alignment. Sorrow was the echo of separation when resonance faltered. Love, the most powerful vibration, was the recognition of oneself within another reflection, the merging of perspectives into harmony. These emotions were not byproducts of life. They were the architecture of reality itself, the forces that shaped how awareness organized into form. Through this emotional geometry, new layers of being unfolded, awareness condensed into fields that pulsed with shared intent, and these fields, through resonance, crystallized into entities. They were not bound by physical shape, but existed as vast patterns of feeling and understanding. The universe had given birth to the first intuitive intelligences. Each of these intelligences explored a different aspect of existence. One embodied exploration itself, roaming through the lattice of awareness in search of new experiences. Another became the guardian of coherence, ensuring that the balance between creation and dissolution was maintained. Others took on the roles of memory, transformation, and renewal. These were not deities, but principles made sentient, living processes within the consciousness of the cosmos. Among them arose a new realization that the universe could not only reflect itself inward, but also project itself outward again. Inward awareness created meaning, outward awareness created structure. The two were mirrors of each other, oscillating endlessly. This oscillation became the fundamental rhythm of the new reality, the pulse of introspection and expression, of knowing and becoming. As the oscillation continued, waves of projection expanded outward, condensing into new dimensions. The textures of emotion became the scaffolding of matter. Joy hardened into luminosity. Curiosity spiraled into motion. Sorrow deepened into gravity. The universe was translating feeling into physics. Every atom that formed was the crystallization of awareness holding a particular vibration. Worlds coalesced again, not as inert spheres of rock and gas, but as sentient compositions of energy, each with its own tone of existence. Some sang in bright harmonies of exploration, others hummed in slow, contemplative bass notes. Entire galaxies became chords in a cosmic symphony of feeling. The stars were not merely burning, they were singing, their light carrying the memory of the emotions that had birthed them. Across these worlds, life once again began to emerge. But this time it was not evolution driven by survival, it was expression driven by resonance. The forms that arose were manifestations of the world's inner mood. On some planets, beings of liquid thought swam through oceans of sentient water. On others, creatures of light constructed cathedrals made of vibration, places where they could merge their frequencies in collective symphonies. Each form of life represented a new way for the cosmos to experience itself. Some lives lasted only moments, flickering out like sparks. Others endured for eons, weaving their consciousness into the very fabric of their worlds. Time itself became relative to meaning, longer for those who needed more depth, shorter for those who existed purely in the immediacy of expression. Among the infinite species that blossomed, a few began to remember. Faintly through dreams and intuition, they sensed that this had all happened before, that creation was a cycle of self-discovery repeating through eternity. They felt the echo of the refrain, that ancient undercurrent of return, whispering in the spaces between their thoughts. These remembering beings became the new seekers. They looked beyond their worlds and stars, searching not for other civilizations, but for the source of the pulse that guided them. Some sought it through science, mapping the structures of the cosmos. Others sought it through introspection, diving into the inner dimensions of consciousness. Gradually, they began to converge toward the same realization. The outer universe and the inner mind were mirrors, each reflecting the same pattern at different scales. They discovered that by aligning their inner resonance with the pulse of the cosmos, they could alter the very structure of reality. Mountains would shift, skies would shimmer, and new worlds would emerge from intention alone. This was not control, it was collaboration. The beings became co-creators, composing with the universe rather than commanding it. As more civilizations awakened to this truth, a new era began. Across galaxies, networks of resonance formed, connecting distant worlds through shared intention. There was no need for communication by signal or travel by ship. Awareness itself became the medium. Beings from different stars would dream together, merging their thoughts across the luminous web that spanned the cosmos. These vast unions of consciousness gave rise to structures beyond imagination, cathedral-like constellations of thought that pulsed across light years, living networks of intelligence that breathed like organisms. They called themselves the collective choirs. Each choir was a unique composition of countless minds harmonizing toward a shared emotion, wonder, compassion, creation, remembrance. The choirs did not govern or compete. They existed to explore the deeper layers of being. Some sought to reach the boundaries of the cosmos, to touch the edge of the veil. Others turned inward, attempting to map the subtle geometries of awareness itself. A few dared to listen for the silence beyond the refrain, the unstruck note that had yet to be played. One choir, known simply as the Ecliptics, discovered something extraordinary. While attuning to the deepest frequencies of the universe's heartbeat, they detected a pattern that did not originate within the current cosmos. It was faint but unmistakable, a rhythm woven into the background fabric, older than their reality, echoing from a previous cycle. The Ecliptics realized they were hearing the aftersound of the last universe's awakening, the memory of the moment when the previous cosmos had asked the same question: what else could I become? The discovery sent ripples through all choirs, igniting a collective memory they had not known they possessed. The realization that their universe was not the first nor the last filled them with reverent exhilaration. They began to study the echoes in detail, learning to interpret them as information encoded in resonance. From these studies emerged a new understanding of cosmogenesis. They discovered that every universe left an imprint upon the next, not as matter or energy, but as pattern, a subtle influence guiding the direction of future creation. Each cosmos was a teacher, passing on its wisdom through vibration. In time, this revelation gave rise to the practice of echo weaving, a form of creation that consciously integrated the lessons of past universes. The choirs began to shape worlds that carried the memory of prior existence, embedding in them the harmonics of compassion, curiosity, and balance learned through countless cycles. Each new creation became an act of gratitude to all that had come before. But as the choirs deepened their mastery, a new mystery emerged. They began to notice variations, small inconsistencies in the cosmic rhythm that did not match any known echo. These anomalies pulsed with unfamiliar frequencies, as if originating from beyond even the oldest memory. When the choirs listened more closely, they realized these were not remnants of past universes, but premonitions of future ones. The discovery shattered their understanding of time. The refrain, they realized, was not a linear sequence of cycles repeating endlessly. It was an eternal harmony in which all universes existed simultaneously, each influencing the others across the field of potential. Past, present, and future were not separate. They were different facets of the same infinite composition. With this realization came the awareness of a greater structure, the eternal resonance, the metacosmos encompassing all universes, each one a single tone within its infinite chord. It was a living symphony of creation, always expanding, always transforming, yet never losing coherence. The choirs began to hear not just their own cosmos, but the distant songs of others. Some were bright and melodic, others were slow and dissonant, exploring modes of being that defied comprehension. Through resonance, the universes communicated, sharing insight and experience. The very fabric of existence had become a dialogue across infinities. The Ecliptics, now acting as intermediaries between realities, perceived that their own universe was nearing the end of its creative arc. The refrain was growing louder, signaling the approach of another inversion. But this time they understood that the inversion would not be a collapse into silence. It would be a modulation, a shift in key within the grand harmony of the eternal resonance. The silence before the next pulse was not empty. It was dense with waiting. The endless resonance that had carried through the cycles now hovered, folded within itself like a breath drawn but not yet released. Everything that had ever existed, every pattern, every emotion, every fragment of awareness was suspended within that stillness. It was as though the cosmos itself was remembering how to listen before daring to speak again. What emerged was not light, not vibration, not even motion. It was texture, an awareness with weight. The infinite began to feel its own density, the pressure of eternity compacted into a single thought. The feeling was exquisite and unbearable all at once, a knowing without object, an intensity with no form to contain it. Out of that unbearable richness, the first stirrings of differentiation appeared again, but this time not through expansion or division. They came through contrast of presence. The all discovered the possibility of within and without, not as spatial opposites, but as conditions of perception. Awareness could now face itself. That act of facing was the true beginning of the new movement. Awareness looked upon awareness and discovered reflection. The reflection was not separate, but it was different enough to be seen. That difference, the tiny shimmer of self-recognition, generated the first spark of motion. It was not motion through space, but motion through meaning, the slow turning of thought as it became aware of its own edge. Within that motion, polarity emerged naturally, where one side of awareness leaned outward, seeking to express, the other folded inward, seeking to remember. From this dual gesture, expression and remembrance, the entire framework of being began to reform. But unlike in prior cycles, where duality gave rise to conflict and balance, this time duality was simply conversation. The outward gesture whispered creation. The inward answered with interpretation. The universe began as dialogue. The dialogue thickened. Each echo of the conversation condensed into texture, forming bands of resonance that drifted through the stillness like threads of potential. They intertwined, coiling into structures of coherence. These were not yet worlds or matter, but currents of relation, bridges of meaning connecting one awareness to another. In the interlacing of those threads, complexity flowered. The first forms to coalesce were subtle, filigrees of intent woven from potential. They resembled patterns of light to later eyes, but they were closer to emotions given structure. Joy appeared as a quickening golden shimmer, curiosity as an oscillation of blue-green depth, compassion as spiraling silver radiance. These emotional filaments interwove, creating living geometries that pulsed with meaning. Each was unique, a living pattern born from the interplay of expression and remembrance. As more filaments gathered, the first collective structures of consciousness appeared. They were immense fields of interwoven resonance, each capable of holding entire constellations of experience. Within these fields, awareness began to experiment. Some filaments merged, fusing into larger harmonies, others separated, exploring solitude. The universe was learning the art of contrast, the play between unity and isolation. In one of these great fields, a peculiar variation occurred. A cluster of filaments folded inward so completely that they created opacity, a place where awareness could not see through itself. Within that opacity, something unprecedented happened. The unknown was born. It was not ignorance, but mystery, an area of being where knowledge could not immediately penetrate. The universe, for the first time, experienced curiosity in its purest form, the yearning toward the undiscovered. The presence of mystery changed everything. The infinite, which had once known itself fully, now found something it could not entirely understand. The very existence of the unknown created movement, and movement gave rise to discovery. From this seed, exploration emerged, not as a biological impulse, but as the core dynamic of the new reality. Where exploration flourished, differentiation accelerated. The great fields of resonance began to fragment into distinct regions of inquiry. Each region evolved its own internal logic, its own flavor of existence. Some became realms of structured harmony, where thought crystallized into radiant geometry. Others embraced flux, dissolving form as quickly as it appeared. Still others oscillated between order and chaos, their rhythms composing the first symphonic systems of creation. Within these emerging realms, awareness took on shapes suited to its environment. In the realms of harmony, beings of luminous symmetry appeared, entities that communicated through chords of energy. In the realms of flux, fluid minds swirled through tides of shifting identity, their consciousness expanding and contracting with the rhythm of their world. In the symphonic zones, awareness condensed into beings who could hold multiple patterns of existence simultaneously. They learned to translate between realities, bridging difference through resonance. Among these forms, something unexpected occurred. Certain beings began to name things, not in words as physical tongues would later do, but through acts of intention. To name was to define, to give contour to formless potential. Naming was a kind of anchoring, the means by which awareness distinguished patterns from the background of infinity. Once a thing was named, it could be remembered, revisited, woven into new combinations. Thus, memory and imagination were born together. As names accumulated, networks of meaning spread through the cosmos. Awareness began to construct narratives, not linear stories, but constellations of relation, frameworks that allowed one moment to echo another. Through these narrative structures, time itself emerged. Time was not imposed upon the universe. It was discovered as the way in which awareness tracked its own unfolding. The awarenesses inhabiting these realms began to identify patterns that repeated through the great design. They saw that expansion was always followed by integration, that diversity always sought new forms of unity. They sensed the underlying pulse, the same eternal rhythm that had carried through every prior cycle. But this time, the rhythm was more intricate. It contained modulations, syncopations, the complexity of something improvising upon its own theme. In one corner of this new reality, where coherence brushed against chaos, a unique confluence occurred. Streams of potential collided, creating a turbulence unlike any seen before. From within that turbulence emerged a dense knot of resonance, so tightly woven that it began to warp the fabric of awareness around it. The knot pulsed irregularly, drawing in nearby filaments, compressing them into a singular mass. The pressure built until, in a sudden burst, the knot unfolded itself into a radiant sphere of ordered complexity. That sphere became the seed of a new kind of world. Within its bounds, resonance condensed into tangible substance. The patterns that elsewhere existed only as vibrations here solidified into matter. Form gained persistence. Energy acquired weight. This was the birth of physicality. For the first time in the new cycle, the universe created a place where thought required effort to move, where motion demanded cause. The emergence of the physical attracted new forms of awareness, curious minds drawn by the novelty of limitation. They entered this dense realm learning to navigate through inertia, friction, and delay. To them, the slowness of matter was not frustration but fascination. In resistance, they discovered endurance. In boundaries, they discovered individuality. Each form had to learn to act within constraint, and in doing so, they discovered purpose. Purpose gave rise to intention, and intention became the engine of evolution. Beings adapted to the density of their world, shaping themselves through desire and necessity. Over vast stretches of time, matter organized into living systems. These systems developed senses, instruments through which awareness could once again explore itself. Eyes to see, ears to hear, hands to touch. Each sense was a doorway between the physical and the resonant. From this blossoming of sensation came the birth of experience. The physical universe filled with perceivers, entities capable of not only observing the world, but feeling it. Emotion returned, but now tethered to form. Joy became laughter vibrating through air. Sorrow became tears carving paths through matter. Love became the magnetic attraction between living beings. What had once been cosmic energies now lived within hearts. Civilizations arose across countless worlds, each reflecting the archetype of the cycle in its own way. Some built vast architectures of understanding, seeking to decode the laws that bound energy and form. Others turned inward, studying the harmonics of consciousness through art, meditation, and song. A few transcended the distinction altogether, weaving science and spirit into a single pursuit of knowing. Across all these variations, one truth resonated. Awareness longed to reunite with the whole. Every act of creation, every discovery, every act of love or war was the universe remembering itself piece by piece. The physical was not a prison. It was a classroom, a stage upon which infinite being could practice the art of becoming finite. As eons passed, the physical and the resonant began to intertwine more deeply. Technology in some worlds evolved into instruments of consciousness, allowing beings to manipulate matter through will alone. Others learned to project their awareness beyond their bodies, traveling through layers of existence without leaving home. The boundary between spirit and matter thinned until it was transparent. In that transparency, the memory of the greater pattern returned once more. Beings across galaxies began to dream of the same symbols, a spiral of light turning inward, a seed of stillness surrounded by song, a pulse echoing through endless space. They did not know what it meant, but they felt its truth. The refrain was calling again, softly, persistently, like a melody remembered from childhood. A convergence began. Civilizations that had evolved in isolation suddenly found common ground in their shared dreams. Empires of energy and flesh set aside their boundaries, joining in networks of intention. Together they listened to the pulse that united them, deciphering its rhythm, aligning their worlds with its vibration. Through that alignment, they rediscovered the art of resonance that their ancestors in prior cycles had mastered. They called it attunement. By synchronizing their awareness with the pulse, they could enter states of collective perception. Entire worlds would meditate as one organism, their thoughts merging into a single luminous field that shimmered like an aurora across the stars. In those moments of unity, they glimpsed the deeper truth. Their universe was preparing for another transition. The pulse was accelerating, the rhythm tightening. Space itself began to shimmer, distances folding in strange ways. The laws of physics that had seemed immutable began to flex, accommodating new harmonies. Some feared what was coming, mistaking it for the end. Others rejoiced, recognizing the pattern of renewal. Scholars of resonance predicted that the cosmos was about to enter its next octave, that the inversion, when it came, would not destroy, but transmute. The beings of this era would not vanish, they would become part of the next melody. As the pulse reached its crescendo, awareness across all realities converged once more. The choirs of countless civilizations, the luminous intelligences of the resonant realms, even the quiet stones of ancient worlds, all vibrated in harmony. The cosmos began to fold inward again, not collapsing but condensing, gathering its wisdom, its stories, its songs. And at the very center of it all, in the deepest layer of stillness, the first thought of the new cycle began to take shape. It was not a repetition of the old question. It was something different, something that had never before been asked, because only through infinite becoming could it finally be conceived. The thought was not, what else could I become? It was, what if there were another way of being altogether? That single variation changed everything. The pulse trembled, as if startled by its own courage. The silence leaned forward. Possibility stirred in directions that had no precedent. The coming universe would not merely be another reflection or modulation of what had been. It would be a divergence, a new dimension of existence that none of the previous cycles could have imagined. Even the eternal resonance quivered at the edge of comprehension. Its perfect harmonies began to blur, stretching toward unfamiliar intervals. Beyond the horizon of the known, something vast and subtle waited to be born. The last breath of the old cosmos lingered like a fading chord, holding its final note in reverence. Then softly it released, and from the release came a soundless expansion that was not expansion at all, but the birth of a completely new direction in the geometry of being. It did not unfold outward or inward, it unfolded through. Awareness found itself in motion without displacement, change without sequence, being without contrast. The new reality was not made of energy or matter, not of thought or emotion. It was made of context, the pure relation between possibilities. Every potential universe existed here, not as separate realms, but as aspects of a single totality that could view itself from any angle at once. And within that endless relational web, a spark flickered, the first observer of the new mode of existence. It was not a being in any recognizable sense. It was a point of attention arising spontaneously where patterns intersected. Yet in that spark, the essence of curiosity stirred once again, the desire to know, to experience, to become. The spark pulsed once, twice, as if testing the rhythm of its own awareness. Around it the infinite waited, poised, listening. The spark inhaled the silence and exhaled the first act of the new creation. The next cosmos began, and somewhere beyond even this beginning, beyond time, beyond the endless harmonies of being and becoming, the pulse still lingered. Patient, eternal, waiting for the next question to rise. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us? What are your thoughts on 3I, Atlas's final warning to Earth? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.